A red-haired man enjoys a bubble bath while the pink-haired baby Elizabeth babbles happily. Amidst the luxurious bathroom setting, she reflects on the rewarding nature of her surprising new life. Memories of her previous life surface, showing her blue-haired former self sinking into a deep, watery abyss. Reborn as a blue-haired infant in her past life, she let out a piercing cry upon entering the world. In that previous existence, she was a commoner named Liz, held by a woman in a humble room. Studying the history of the kingdom of Eltode, she learns of a 300-year legacy and a dark period. A portrait reveals the infamous Tyrant family, striking figures marked by their distinctive and blazing red hair. The warrior Michael Walzer is depicted crushing his rebellious enemies with overwhelming and ruthless military force. Adelina, a legendary femme fatale, created self-serving laws while simultaneously opening palace doors to talented commoners. Reading their tragic history, she hopes to avoid the ruinous fate that eventually befell the infamous tyrants. At 15, she began her career at the Government Affairs Office, eager to prove her worth. Her noble colleagues immediately mocked her, throwing a flurry of papers at her head in open derision. Despite the unfair treatment of commoners, she diligently worked at her desk while others made cruel jokes. A sudden splash sounds as a colleague dumps a bowl of food onto her head, insulting her background. She silently endured the humiliation of being offered scraps, as if she were a lowly, starving animal. Queen Claudia Eltode, the kingdom's golden savior, offered her a rare moment of kindness and high praise. The graceful queen wiped away her tears, claiming that only a commoner's perspective could save the kingdom. To her delight, she was eventually entrusted with the management of the kingdom's most precious magic crystal. A quick metallic ka-chok sounds as a hand reaches for a door, preceded by ominous and dark energy. An incident shattered her peace when she caught a blonde girl brandishing a dagger near the crystal. The girl suddenly screamed, falsely accusing her of being a thief, trying to steal the national treasure. Queen Claudia arrived and immediately sided with her daughter, calling the appointment of a commoner a mistake. Bewildered and defenseless, she was forced to her knees as guards surrounded her with sharpened spears. The queen condemned her, declaring that her daughter fulfilled her royal duty by exposing the alleged crime. A final, cold command for execution was given as she looked up at her captors in total shock. She wept in despair, seeing the queen's cold, unforgiving eyes reflected in the cold steel of a spear. A rowdy crowd gathered at the guillotine, chanting for her death as she stood upon the platform. Queen Claudia and her daughter watched the spectacle, unmoved by the injustice they had just orchestrated. Facing her end, she realized that commoners could never truly break the cycle of royal oppression. A heavy thud sounds as a rock strikes her head, thrown by the angry and misinformed mob. Looking out from their carriage, the royals acknowledged the cold reality of birth circumstances and social gaps. With no family to protect her, she accepted her fate beneath the shadow of the falling blade. A sharp shying echoes as the blade drops, and she prays for mercy in her final moments. A vision of her younger self reaching out within a giant purple crystal flickers before her eyes. Waking up with a heavy body, she finds herself lying in a lavish and unfamiliar bedroom. She stares in disbelief at her tiny infant hands, confused by the strange babbles she makes. The pink-haired baby Elizabeth looks up with wide, sparkling eyes and a drooling, toothless smile. Overwhelmed with joy, the tiny infant giggles and covers her mouth in a moment of pure happiness. Her eyes widen as she spots a family portrait on the wall, featuring familiar and infamous hair colors. She focuses on the red-haired boy in the painting, realizing a terrifying connection to her past life's history. A sudden, dark realization strikes as the name of the infamous Walzer family flashes through her mind. Portraits of Michael Walzer and the femme fatale Adelina confirm her worst fears about her new parents. She recognizes the current chancellor, Julius, as a key figure in the fall of the Tyrant family. A chilling memory of Queen Claudia ordering her previous execution resurfaces, filling her with fresh dread. She recalls the terrifying image of Michael, the battlefield demon, doused in the blood of his enemies. Realizing she has been reincarnated into the very Tyrant family she studied, the baby screams in terror. Now calm, Elizabeth sits up in her crib, staring forward as she processes her bizarre new reality. Looking around the opulent nursery, she marvels at the top-class luxury that only high nobility possesses. The vast golden room stands silent as the tiny princess contemplates her future from her ornate crib. Lying on her back, Elizabeth stares at the ceiling with a thoughtful and remarkably mature expression. Elizabeth trembles in her crib, her tiny body shaking with fear as she faces her new life. A small, chibi version of her reflects on the fallen Tyrant family while their legacy crumbles around her. Panic sets in as the pink-haired baby realizes no one is coming to her aid in this silent nursery. A sudden, sharp ka-chuck sounds as a brown-haired maid finally enters the room, ignoring the ticking clock. The maid offers a bottle, but Elizabeth is repulsed by the milk being far too cold to drink. Elizabeth screams in protest at the terrible care, while the maid turns away, declaring her work done. Tears stream down her face as she laments the cold meal and the discomfort of a dirty diaper. She cries out in frustration, shocked that her new noble family provides such abysmal care for an infant. Bright sunlight streams through the ornate window, a stark contrast to the neglect she feels inside the nursery. Reaching her limit, Elizabeth wails in despair as the disinterested maid remains focused on her own tasks. A sudden, soft purr sounds as a hand pat confirms she is still being largely ignored by the staff. Her stomach growls loudly as she realizes she has gone half a day without any proper food or drink. Meager supplies sit on a nearby table, highlighting the lack of attention given to the royal baby's needs. A quick, resonant clink sounds, catching Elizabeth's attention as she peers out from the safety of her pillow. Startled, she spots the brown-haired maid watching her from the doorway with a silent and unreadable expression. The brown-haired maid leans over the crib, her face shadowed by a lack of warmth or maternal care. Elizabeth watches suspiciously as the maid departs, leaving her alone once again in the vast, silent room. Resolving to survive, the infant decides she must test her latent magical abilities to provide for herself. She recalls her previous life as blue-haired Liz, where she studied spells to compensate for her low magic. Concentrating with all her might, the tiny, pink-haired girl attempts to summon the flames of her new family. A huge purple magic circle erupts beneath her, signaling the overwhelming power she now possesses as a Walzer. With a small spark, she successfully uses her magic to warm a bottle of milk for herself. She drinks the warm milk with a blush, finding the simple meal absolutely delicious after her long fast. Two maids stand together, noting that only the lowest servants seem tasked with the baby's daily care. Elizabeth looks on with a skeptical, mature expression as the servants underestimate the intelligence of their charge. Finally satisfied and full, the baby drifts off into a peaceful sleep while clutching her warm bottle. The tall, red-haired Michael stands with his back to the maids, his presence filling the hallway with dread. His cold green eye narrows, casting a terrifying chill over the servants who tremble in his proximity. Michael, known as the demon of the battlefield, exudes an aura of lethal intent as he arrives home. Back in the nursery, Elizabeth rests happily with a full belly, unaware of the warrior's close presence. Michael questions the staff about any changes, receiving a bowing report that everything is proceeding smoothly. He stares with a sharp, unforgiving gaze, dismissing the need for any further trivial reports on the child. Clad in a lavish white and blue robe, Michael decides he should personally inspect the nursery occasionally. The massive, golden mansion is filled with servants, yet the baby princess remains isolated in her luxury. A maid lazily assumes baby care is easy, while Elizabeth's internal monologue screams in total disagreement. Another maid believes her colleague enjoys the work, but the baby babbles a loud, angry rejection. Elizabeth is horrified to realize that every servant assumes someone else is actually doing the hard work. Under the glow of a massive chandelier, the tiny infant looks incredibly small and vulnerable in her crib. She realizes that without her past life knowledge and magic, she would surely have perished from neglect. A sudden, heavy thrum of dark energy fills the room as a giant eye focuses on her. Cold, icy eyes peer through the crack of the door, sending a terrifying shiver down Elizabeth's spine. She cries out in fear, overwhelmed by the presence of a man who only visits when others leave. Michael watches from the darkness, his green eyes glowing as the baby wonders what she should do. Well, if neglect is the game, then this baby is definitely winning it in style with her sunglasses. The dark energy returns as she ponders the identity and intent of the man watching her so intently. A shadowy figure looms in the doorway, his silhouette marking him as the intimidating red-haired warrior. She tries to greet him properly, but her attempts result only in unintelligible baby babbles and drool. Frustrated, she realizes that absolutely nothing of her mature thoughts reached the silent man at the door. Michael stands silently in the ornate doorway, his face hidden while he observes the tiny pink-haired princess. Elizabeth looks up with a bright, toothless smile, her green eyes sparkling with a newfound sense of resilience. Elizabeth stares up at her father, Michael, as he looms over her ornate crib with a silent and intense gaze. Terror grips the infant as Michael's chilling eyes fixate on her, causing her to burst into fresh, fearful tears. To her shock, the intimidating warrior reaches out a large hand and gently strokes her soft, pink hair. A heavy silence settles as Michael's glowing green eyes narrow, his face partially obscured by a dark and ominous shadow. The room remains tense as a brown-haired maid enters with a tray, questioning the baby's sudden and visible distress. Elizabeth realizes the gravity of her situation, fearing that her mature intellect or magical potential might be discovered. The neglectful maid turns away with a sharp scowl, clearly irritated by the extra work the crying baby provides. Frustration boils over as Elizabeth tries to manifest her magic, only to realize her infant body cannot. A deep, echoing voice demands answers, freezing the brown-haired maid in place. With lethal speed, Michael seizes the maid's arm. His towering presence. A sudden clink sounds as the tray falls, while Michael stands over the cowering maid. From a distance, the vast nursery feels cold and empty, while the master of the house confronts the terrified servant. Michael draws his sword, condemning the maid for her false reports as she begs for her life in total terror. Elizabeth's heart races as she watches the scene unfold, horrified that her father might actually execute the trembling maid. A sudden cry of "Awa!" rings out as Elizabeth desperately tries to intervene before the sharp blade can fall. The sword stops just inches from the maid as Michael stands motionless, his attention captured by the infant's outburst. Tears stream down Elizabeth's face as she looks up, her small heart heavy with the weight of the violence. Shock ripples through Michael's stoic expression, his usual coldness momentarily shattered by the baby's unexpected and vocal reaction. A blue-clad official rushes into the room, bowing low as Michael prepares to issue a final and stern judgment. Michael lifts the tiny girl, and Elizabeth finds herself thinking of him as her father for the first time. Dread sinks in as she recalls the history of the tyrant Michael Valtzer and her doomed place within it. Visions of a burning portrait haunt her, confirming that her new family is destined for a violent and fiery end. Elizabeth wails in her crib until Servant C, a kind-eyed woman, approaches to offer a moment of genuine comfort. Drinking the warm milk, Elizabeth remains uneasy despite the servant's gentle care, her mind racing with future threats. Servant C mentions Lady Adelina's upcoming appointment, a key event that signaled the beginning of the family's ruin. Horror dawns on the baby as she calculates her life expectancy is now reduced to a single and fleeting year. Memories of her past life as blue-haired Liz surface, reminding her of the pain she has already endured once. She realizes that her knowledge of the future is her only weapon in this fight for the family's survival. Sunlight illuminates the newly cleaned nursery, marking the first small change in her otherwise grim and neglected surroundings. With renewed spirit, Elizabeth cheers and pumps her tiny fists, determined to rewrite the story of the Valtzer family. Her expression turns remarkably solemn as she stares ahead, the weight of her mission settling onto her small shoulders. Elizabeth reflects on her previous life's studious nature, acknowledging that human relationships were always her greatest and unsolved challenge. Michael's piercing gaze returns, his face a mask of cold intensity that sends a shiver through the entire nursery. Looking up at him, Elizabeth is once again struck by how genuinely terrifying her father's natural expression can be. A suffocating purple aura erupts from Michael as he leans over the crib, causing the sweating baby to tremble. She recalls a hazy vision of the past, realizing that perhaps her father was the one who protected her. Flowers bloom in her imagination as she tries to. The crushing pressure of his aura proves too much, and Elizabeth laments her failure to bridge the emotional gap. Determined to try again, Elizabeth prepares to switch on her charm as Servant C brings her to the crib. She visualizes a plan to turn the battlefield demon into a loyal ally, apologizing in. Elizabeth attempts to shield herself with magic to survive her father's aura without throwing up from pure fear. Her perspective shifts as she notices Michael awkwardly holding a baby bottle and a set of tiny, frilly clothes. Michael stands stiffly, clutching a yellow dress and a pink bunny, his cold demeanor clashing with the adorable items. Even outside, animals flee in terror from his presence, highlighting the natural and destructive aura he constantly emits. Elizabeth scolds him in baby talk for his lack of gentleness, while Servant C watches their bizarre interaction curiously. Michael demands confirmation of his daughter's affection, terrifying the maid, while Elizabeth tries to calm him with babbles. The red-haired warrior gazes down, his expression unreadable as he processes the strange and vocal reactions of his daughter. Elizabeth looks back with wide, sparkling eyes, searching for a spark of humanity within the man known as a tyrant. Michael holds out a stuffed bunny for Elizabeth, who looks up at her father with a curious expression. Elizabeth considers her father's odd gentleness, while Michael stands in the distance with the brown-haired maid. Michael gazes downward thoughtfully, while the maid stands behind him, holding a bundle of brown linens. The maid's panicked thoughts are interrupted by Michael's terrifying purple aura as he reaches a startling realization. A sudden boom punctuates Michael's intense and determined declaration that he shall bathe his daughter himself. The maid nervously explains that magical cleansing tools make his direct intervention unnecessary for the small baby. Elizabeth's face fills with shock as she processes the terrifying reality of her father's bath time plans. Panicked cries fill the nursery while Michael remains stoic, ignoring the maid's frantic and terrified reactions. Michael, wearing a purple robe, holds the crying Elizabeth aloft while the maid screams in the background. The brown-haired servant bravely warns Michael that his rough way of holding the baby will only scare her. A sudden spark of energy appears as Michael pulls Elizabeth closer to his bare, muscular chest. A dazzling, amazing fills Elizabeth's thoughts as she finds herself fitting perfectly against her father's muscular physique. Cradled with such incredible stability, Elizabeth feels safe and secure in her father's surprisingly gentle embrace. The scene shifts to the grand, sunlight-filled bathroom where Michael stands ready with his daughter. Elizabeth peeks curiously as Michael selects from a variety of bath products on a wooden tray. Terrified by the super mint soap, Chibi Elizabeth screams for the servant to save her from the scent. Following the bath, Elizabeth lies exhausted in her crib, grateful to still be alive after the intense ordeal. A decorative frame captures the memory of the chaotic bath time with Michael, the maid, and a traumatized baby. Elizabeth refuses her milk, her bloated stomach making her feel miserable and tired after the long day.
"A worried young lady?" escapes the maid as she notices the baby looking pale and unwell.
Pain flares as Elizabeth clutches her stomach, and the maid rushes off to fetch Michael immediately. A brilliant golden crest manifests beneath the crib, bathing the nursery in a surge of powerful magical energy. Michael bursts through the doors with a frantic Elizabeth, his face full of fear for his daughter. He rushes to the crib where the maid stands, both of them looking down at the child in concern. Elizabeth sleeps peacefully in her crib, a soft glow still lingering around her tiny, resting form. Relief washes over Michael and the maid as they watch the baby sleep, though Michael remains deeply worried. Michael commands the maid to call a doctor just in case, while he continues to watch over Elizabeth. As Michael stands by the crib, a translucent blue-haired figure begins to separate from the baby's body. The blue-haired Adelina is shocked to find herself back in her old body, looking around the nursery. Adelina sits on the floor near her crib, taking a moment to process her sudden and unexpected transformation. She leans over the railing, looking down at her own tiny, sleeping baby self with a bewildered expression. Magic sparkles as Adelina questions why her old form has returned, while her baby self remains asleep. Purple energy swirls around Adelina's hands as the baby Elizabeth begins to wake up from her slumber. The purple-haired baby opens her eyes wide, looking around the room with a focused and alert gaze. Adelina's spirit jumps with joy, her form floating through the air, surrounded by playful, sparkling stars. Adelina watches her sleeping baby self, realizing the deep connection between her current state and her tiny body. Examining her glowing hands, Adelina realizes that her magic has finally returned to her in full force. A humorous pop marks Adelina's realization that her baby self, Liz, appeared directly from her own being. Adelina explains the danger, if anyone touches her sleeping baby body, she will be pulled back instantly. The baby wakes up with a cheerful "Uda," while a narrative book mentions the dangers of misfiring magic. Elizabeth suspects her lack of magical use caused the incident, while Chibi Michael and the maid fret nearby. Michael rushes back into the nursery, his face flushed as he desperately asks if Elizabeth is safe. The maid escorts a bald, elderly doctor into the room to perform an immediate medical checkup. Leaning on his cane, the elderly doctor asks about Elizabeth's condition, while Michael looms over him. Michael aggressively orders the doctor to hurry, making the baby feel pity for the terrified old man. Elizabeth smiles to show she's fine, while Michael comically coughs blood from the sheer stress of the situation. The doctor examines Elizabeth while Michael collapses to the floor, completely drained by his overwhelming worry. A stunned "What?" escapes Michael as the doctor declares that Elizabeth is actually in perfectly good health. Michael panics, insisting she was suffering, while the exhausted doctor begins to faint from the intense pressure. To save the doctor's life, Elizabeth prepares to speak her first word, starting with a loud "da." Michael looks down at pink-haired Elizabeth, who stares back with wide, surprised eyes as he addresses her directly. The infant looks determined, her brow furrowed as she processes the gravity of her father's intense presence. Michael's sharp green eyes remain fixed on his daughter. The tall, red-haired man carries the tiny princess through the opulent hallways of their vast and silent estate. Michael walks past an elderly man and a maid, while Elizabeth realizes her stomach pain stems from magical buildup. A magical manifestation of Elizabeth's adult form. The blue-haired woman realizes she is mastering this projection, her green eyes sparkling with a sense of accomplishment. She examines her mature reflection in the mirror, stunned to see her past life appearance fully manifested through magic. Touching her face, she notes her healthy complexion and wonders if she has gained a bit of weight. Elizabeth realizes that in this capable adult form, her options for saving her doomed family have significantly expanded. She acknowledges that her current outfit is unsuitable and decides she needs a disguise more appropriate for exploration. With a swirl of magical energy, she transforms her clothing into a detailed black and white. She marvels at her magical, now fully dressed as a... Cautiously, she peeks through the crack of a massive door, beginning her secret trek through the Tyrant's mansion. Humming a cheerful tune about exploration, she walks through the grand, sunlit halls with a newfound sense of freedom. Under the bright blue sky, she smiles happily while passing through a lush garden filled with orange blossoms. Walking through the arched corridors, she is relieved to find that her magical form retains all 5 human senses. She stops abruptly in a quiet room, her attention captured by a sudden and subtle movement nearby. The mental strain of navigating the massive estate takes its toll, leaving her feeling completely exhausted and drained. From around a corner, she spots a brown-haired maid carrying a tray of tea and fresh sandwiches. The delicious aroma of the food fills the air, and Liz's eyes widen as she realizes the destination. Excitedly, she concludes the tray must be for her father and follows the maid toward his private office. Inside the lavish office, Michael sits at a large desk, diligently working through a mountain of administrative paperwork. An oppressive purple Liz panics as a golden magic circle appears, sensing that her father is suddenly moving in her direction. A sharp click sounds as the door handle turns, and Liz frantically wonders how to escape being discovered. Michael flings the double doors wide open, his purple cape. He scans the empty corridor with a... Michael returns to the nursery and leans over the... Elizabeth looks up and offers a bright, joyful... A sudden thud echoes as the baby realizes she barely managed to teleport back into her crib in time. A swirl of magic carries the blue hair. Michael's silhouette is visible through the door as the magical portal begins to close behind the fleeing spirit. With a flash of blue light and a soft sound, the magical projection merges back into the infant Elizabeth. Heart thumping loudly, the baby pants for breath, relieved that she successfully made it back before her father entered. Michael mentions a bath, triggering a terrifying flood of memories for Elizabeth regarding a giant, intimidating hairbrush. Elizabeth watches her father, reflecting on how intensely busy he's. She wonders why the powerful knight commander... Looking around the vast mansion, she realizes that for such a large estate, there are remarkably few servants. Michael's large hands lift the tiny infant from her crib, his touch surprisingly careful despite his immense strength. He asks if she is afraid of him, his voice low and solemn as he holds her close. Elizabeth babbles a brave response, mentally asserting that she is not scared of the man who protects them. She looks into his eyes and realizes that any violence in his past was a necessary part of survival. A dark vision shows Michael standing on a battlefield, his sword raised over a fallen foe amidst falling embers. She realizes his self-sacrifice for the nation mirrors her own. Michael questions his own awkward words while holding Elizabeth, who watches him with curious and wide eyes. The pink-haired baby looks up in awe, mesmerized by the intense but calm man currently holding her. A soft, flowery background surrounds them as Michael gazes at his daughter with a rare and uncharacteristic gentleness. Elizabeth reaches out to touch her father's chest, bridging the emotional gap between the warrior and his child. Michael quickly dismisses the maid's observation, his face a mask of stern and stoic indifference once again. The brown-haired servant beams, noting that Michael has genuinely improved at caring for the young lady. Elizabeth smiles knowingly while resting against her father, finding his hidden and sincere efforts for her quite endearing. A funny memory reveals Michael's clumsy beginnings, where he accidentally crushed cushions while practicing his holding technique. A loud rip founds. Michael accepts the praise with a stoic nod, his sharp green eyes reflecting a quiet sense of duty. Sunlight bathes Elizabeth as she rests, her small body glowing with the soft hum of restorative magical energy. Adult Liz's blue-haired projection stands tall in the nursery, ready to take action for her family's sake. She worries that her father's heavy workload will derail her bonding operation and their collective chance at survival. With a bright flash of light, Liz transforms her appearance into a servant's uniform for her secret mission. A quick flash sounds. Disguised as a maid, Liz rushes through the mansion's corridors, determined to assist her father in secret. She recalls her past life's efficiency, confident she can complete mountains of difficult paperwork in a mere flash. Liz walks through the vast and silent hallways, her blue hair neatly tucked under her new maid's cap. She suddenly stops, realizing her internal monologue is a bit much, before springing back into action. A sudden skirt sounds. A close-up shows a hand skillfully gripping a feathered quill, preparing to tackle the Knight Commander's administrative burden. A soft scritch sounds. Liz works tirelessly at the desk, meticulously drafting documents so Michael only needs to provide his final signature. A rhythmic scribble sounds. Michael finds the finished work and offers a rare, sparkling smile that highlights his remarkably handsome features. His expression quickly sours as he reads a specific letter, his aura turning cold and suspicious once more. The Knight Commander sits amidst a sea of paperwork, looking isolated in his massive and sun-drenched private office. From the garden, Liz watches through the window, hoping this secret aid buys her more bonding time. She smiles contentedly at the successful ruse, her green eyes bright with hope for their family's future. Michael looks over his shoulder toward the window, sensing a familiar but unidentifiable presence nearby. Later, Michael and Elizabeth share a moment of pure bliss, napping together in a warm and peaceful embrace. The baby snuggles into her father's side, finding the warmth of his presence better than any magic. Elizabeth reflects on how her past life memories and magic have made this impossible connection a reality. She compares her magical aura to Michael's natural and terrifying presence that sends the other servants running. Engulfed in a fiery aura, Michael decides the knights need more drills to fix their lacking discipline. Michael looks down at the happy babbles of his daughter, realizing she has yet to meet her brother. Terror strikes Elizabeth as she remembers the one family member she had completely and dangerously forgotten. A vision of the ruthless Julius Volzer appears, his intense gaze signaling trouble for the young princess. A sharp gasp sounds. Nobles whisper in the palace as Julius walks past them, his presence commanding and ice-cold. A collective hush sounds. A servant informs Julius that the Knight Commander will be skipping sword training again today. Julius stops in the hallway, his posture stiff as he asks for the reason behind his father's absence. The young man turns slightly, his sharp green eyes and red hair a perfect match for Michael's appearance. Elizabeth recalls how Julius was obsessed with their father, yet he seemed to have forgotten her entirely. Michael's intimidating silhouette looms in her mind, a reminder of why the servants find him so frightening. Elizabeth imagines a more helpful future, where Julius uses his status to support their incredibly busy father. Held by the brown-haired maid, the pink-haired baby looks determined to handle her difficult older brother. Memories of the past life show Julius as he was famous for his handsome looks. Adult Liz observes from the back of the court as Julius glares at Liz with freezing contempt, insulting her status as a lowly commoner with no presence. His harsh words cut deep as he questions if the royal court has truly fallen into ruin. Liz clenches her teeth, remembering the relentless bullying she endured from the man who is now her brother. Elizabeth rolls restlessly in her. She realizes that Liz remembers her early days at the palace, where she secretly studied profiles to survive the bullying. Records show Julius entered the palace at age 12, a fact Elizabeth now finds concerningly young. Julius stands alone, recalling how his father sternly insisted on him beginning weekly sword lessons. Hearing that his father delayed, enraged, Julius orders a carriage to the Volzer estate, rushing off as quick, heavy footsteps sound. In the sunlit garden, Michael holds baby Elizabeth, while a brown-haired maid explains the health benefits of sunlight. Michael's attention shifts toward the gate as the rhythmic sound of an approaching carriage echoes through the air. Elizabeth watches with wide, curious eyes as her father notes the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Michael dismisses the maid's offer to investigate, observing that the carriage is already heading directly toward them. Julius leaps from the carriage and calls out to his father, while Elizabeth watches with a look of pure shock. Elizabeth struggles to control. A heavy silence falls over the garden as the brown-haired maid stands by. Since Julius winces as a baby's lap, the group gathers in the sprawling garden, where Julius stands before his seated father and the crying baby. Trembling, the young red-haired boy struggles to find his voice while standing in Michael's imposing shadow. Michael's aura turns cold and oppressive as he bluntly commands his son to leave immediately. Elizabeth notices a flicker of deep hurt in Julius's eyes before he is dismissed by their father's coldness. Noting the baby's distress, the brown-haired maid prepares to take Elizabeth back inside for a nap. Michael remains stoic as he hands his daughter over to the servant, the tense encounter ending abruptly. Elizabeth reflects on the interaction, realizing that Michael likely doesn't hate Julius despite his harsh behavior. Settling into her maid's arms, the pink-haired baby feels a wave of sympathy for her brother's lonely position. Dejected and alone, Julius sits on the garden floor, the sound of soft sobbing filling the quiet air. Close-up on Julius reveals his eyes filled with tears as he struggles with his father's cold rejection. The blue-haired Liz, disguised in a maid's uniform, approaches the weeping boy with a kind and gentle smile. Disguised Liz offers a warm greeting, her sudden presence startling the crying boy in the middle of the garden. Julius snaps back with defensive arrogance, demandingly asking the mysterious maid's identity while his face flushes red. Elizabeth finds Julius' attempts to hide his tears absolutely adorable, noting how much he differs from his future self. She feels a pang of regret, knowing this beautiful boy is destined to become a cold, unfeeling tyrant. Julius notices her intense stare and suspiciously questions why she is watching him so closely. The two sit together in the bright garden, a moment of unexpected peace forming between the unlikely pair. Liz looks at her brother with a soft, determined expression, hoping to alter the course of his future. Suddenly, she turns toward him with a bright smile, enthusiastically proposing that they create a secret plan together. With a joyful laugh, Liz announces her intention to launch a special operation for their family's benefit. They sit on the steps as Liz confidently explains her ideas to a skeptical and confused Julius. Julius questions her sudden boldness as the blue-haired maid continues to detail her ambitious plans for their father. Liz triumphantly names her scheme the Super BFF Parent and Child Operation, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Julius stares in blank disbelief, bluntly insulting the ridiculous name she has chosen for her grand mission. Liz playfully teases him, questioning his maturity as a soft, rhythmic tap sounds against the garden floor. Stunned by her informal attitude, Liz reflects on Julius's bratty attitude, recalling how he has always been a difficult and spoiled little tyrant. Julius reluctantly agrees to listen to her plan, maintaining his tough facade while curious about her intentions. Liz bristles at his insolent tone, internally fuming at how much he resembles. When Julius mocks her expression, Liz's frustration boils over, a sharp, grinding sound escaping her teeth. Clutching her head in exasperation, Liz wonders if she can. Later that evening, Michael and Julius share a dinner in an atmosphere that feels incredibly cold and silent. Elizabeth watches the meal from afar, noting that the tension between the two men is absolutely suffocating. Julius formally reports his upcoming return to the academy, hoping for a shred of recognition from his father. Michael gives a curt, dismissive response while focused on his food, leaving the boy's efforts unacknowledged. Despite Julius mentioning his tournament victory, Michael remains unresponsive, casting a dark gloom over the dining hall. Elizabeth clenches her fists with a look of fierce determination, ready to bring her family together at last. Julius feels his praise is worthless, while baby Elizabeth reacts with a dramatic and comical expression. Julius tentatively invites his father to go deer hunting, but Michael looks away without acknowledging the offer. Sensing the rejection, Elizabeth comically insists the servants are enough, while Michael walks away, leaving Julius dejected. Determined to prove himself, Julius announces he will go hunt the deer alone as a display of strength. Michael suddenly gathers Elizabeth in his arms, bluntly stating that Julius's plan will not be necessary. Elizabeth despairs over Michael's coldness, realizing her brother has nothing to cling to in this family. Julius screams in defiance at the blue-haired maid, refusing her suggestion to act like a needy child. Disguised Liz encourages bonding, but Julius remains focused on the harsh and stoic duties of the Veltzer household. The blue-haired maid watches with intense focus as Julius explains that personal indulgence is strictly forbidden for them. Elizabeth reflects on the lack of a normal parent-child bond within her terrifying and tyrannical family. The maid offers a somber apology, acknowledging that hoping for a normal family dynamic might be too much. Julius watches the maid depart, convincing himself that his father's interest in Elizabeth is merely a fleeting whim. Haunted by his father's silence, Julius vows to work harder and deliver the results Michael demands. Standing alone in the grand hall, the boy resolves to grow as strong as his intimidating father. A sequence of intense training follows, showing Julius's bloodied hands as he pushes himself to the absolute limit. Julius is left speechless and blushing when the blue-haired maid suggests a comically named pick-me-up and hug-me operation. The maid continues brainstorming ridiculous bonding plans while Julius watches her with a mixture of confusion and intrigue. When Julius calls her a strange person, the maid reacts with a flustered and loud protest. A chibi version of the maid fusses at his comment, while Julius finds her cheeky attitude quite bizarre. Looking refreshed and happy, Julius finally breaks into a genuine smile that touches his eyes. Observing from a distance, the blue-haired maid feels relieved to see his smile instead of his tears. Later that night, Julius walks through the quiet palace halls with a determined and focused expression. Julius decides it is finally time to use a secret technique he perfected during his time at the academy. A close-up of the boy's boots as he quietly approaches a set of double doors in the palace. A bright, magical light erupts in the nursery as baby Elizabeth wakes up, wondering what is happening. Julius leans over the crib to perform a goofy peekaboo move, leaving Elizabeth utterly baffled. The pink-haired baby bursts into joyful laughter, delighted by her brother's unexpected and silly attempt at play. Michael's terrifying presence looms behind them as he demands to know exactly what Julius is doing. Surrounded by a menacing aura, a shirtless Michael repeats his question, sending a wave of fear through Julius. Trembling, the boy explains it is a special trick his academy teachers taught him to entertain infants. Michael watches in silence as Julius hesitantly demonstrates the peekaboo move for his baby sister once more. Michael executes a thunderous boo that sends Julius and the baby's cradle flying across the room. A toy bunny flies through the air as Michael shouts a warning, the room descending into total chaos. Moving with lightning speed, Michael dives through the air to catch Elizabeth before she hits the floor. While Elizabeth realizes she nearly died, Julius hangs his head and offers a sincere apology to his father. Michael reflects on the danger of his own power, while Elizabeth internally defends Julius's innocent intentions. Michael places a firm hand on Julius's shoulder, his expression shifting to one of serious fatherly instruction. Michael commands Julius to protect Elizabeth as her brother, a request that Julius accepts with a joyful shout. Julius pulls his little sister into a tight, protective hug, while Michael watches the siblings with a softened gaze. Overwhelmed with happiness, Julius blushes deeply as he finally feels a true connection to his family members. A final narrative bubble declares the chaotic mission a smashing success, despite the nearly fatal outcome. Back in the garden, the blue-haired maid talks to Julius about how they have grown much closer. Julius dismisses the maid's sentiment, telling her to abandon any plans of her moving into the palace permanently. Looking contemplative, Julius stares out over the garden, the breeze ruffling his bright red hair. Julius suddenly realizes the maid has information she shouldn't have, questioning her about his invitation to the palace. He grows intensely suspicious, noting that he hasn't even shared the news of his invitation with Michael yet. Julius leans in close, his golden eyes sharp as he demandingly asks if the maid is a spy. Panicking, the blue-haired maid waves her hands frantically, loudly denying the boy's serious and frightening accusation. In a state of total panic, the maid wonders how she can possibly explain that she is Elizabeth. Julius stares intensely at the blue-haired maid, a heavy silence hanging between them after his sudden and sharp accusation. Panicking at her massive slip-up, the blue-haired maid screams her own name, Elizabeth, in a moment of absolute shock. The two stand together in a void-like space, the maid hovering slightly while struggling to process her own blunder. A look of utter confusion washes over the red-haired boy as he repeats her name with wide-eyed disbelief. Clutching her head, Liz spirals into a frantic panic, while Julius demandingly asks what on earth she is talking about. Julius sighs deeply, pressing her for the meaning behind her outrageous claim of being his own baby sister, Elizabeth. Desperate to cover her tracks, Liz bursts into forced, awkward laughter, trying to play off her confession as a joke. The boy remains unmoved, threatening to report her as an intruder, while she frantically begs for a chance to explain. Gripping his arm, Liz realizes with a sinking heart that the truth might be too far-fetched for him to believe. Julius' golden eyes flash with a terrifying intensity as he grabs her wrist, demanding a clear and immediate explanation. He asks if she can prove her claim right here, and Liz solemnly agrees as they stand in the nursery. While the baby reflects on Julius's willingness to listen, Liz decides showing him the truth is the fastest path forward. Liz approaches the crib under Julius's watchful eye, ready to reveal the magical secret behind her dual existence. A bright, magical light erupts in the room as Julius protectively questions what she is doing to the baby. Baby Elizabeth looks up with wide, sparkling eyes, the magical energy swirling around her as the truth begins to unfold. The baby lets out a soft coo, leaving the red-haired boy staring in wide-eyed amazement at the strange, magical scene. Elizabeth tries to communicate her identity through baby talk, while Julius watches her with growing suspicion and intense wonder. Julius asks if she can return to her original form, his voice trembling as the baby glows with magical light. The maid's body dissolves into blue energy, leaving Julius staring at the ethereal, blue-haired form of his sister floating above. The pink-haired baby drifts back to sleep, the intense magical exertion finally taking its toll on her tiny, fragile body. Now in a different form, Liz explains that her current body is a magical construct created by her own power. She reflects on how Julius's bossy personality hasn't changed a bit from her previous life as an Imperial employee. A memory from the past shows adult Julius forcing Elizabeth to work through the night over a single matching error. Back in the nursery, Julius accepts her explanation with a curt nod, while Liz prepares for a very long story. The pair stands together in the quiet room, an uneasy but necessary alliance forming between the two time-crossed siblings. Liz gestures toward the boy, continuing her explanation of the future events she is desperately trying to prevent from happening. Julius catches on with impressive speed, correctly deducing that she possesses memories from a future life yet to occur. Relieved, Liz praises her brother's genius, acknowledging his reputation as a prodigy at the Royal Academy is well-deserved. Julius recalls ancient texts describing wizards who could create duplicate bodies, wondering if they too were reborn from time. Liz thinks back to her past life, remembering a document she found while organizing archives that changed her entire perspective. The document revealed a tragic secret. The tyrant Michael had once entered the dangerous demon forest completely and utterly alone. Flashback images show Michael battling lightning-wreathed wolves, left to fend for himself without any reinforcements in sight. Bloodied and exhausted, Michael collapsed while holding a magical crystal that would eventually become a prized national treasure. By offering that crystal to the royals, Julius secured his position as chancellor, rising from a fallen noble house. Liz watches her brother, knowing the dark path his future takes and the sacrifices their father made for him. She hesitates and looks away, realizing there are still some things about the future she simply cannot reveal to Julius. Julius listens intently, his expression softening as he tries to process the weight of his sister's incredible revelations. A genuine, bright smile breaks across the boy's face as he feels a new sense of purpose and connection. Julius beams with joy, the shadows of his lonely future receding as he embraces this unexpected bond with Elizabeth. Elizabeth feels a wave of relief, realizing her brother finally understands her and the mission they must undertake together. She envisions a different future where their father isn't left alone to face the monsters in the dark, rainy woods. Liz hopes that by staying by Michael's side, Julius can change the fate of their family and prevent tragedy. A sudden, sharp noise at the door startles them both, breaking the quiet intimacy of their secret and magical meeting. A servant enters the room with a polite greeting, leaving a stunned and blue-faced Julius scrambling for an excuse. Julius leans back over the crib as the baby playfully says, "Boo?" trying to act like nothing happened. Julius demands she give a real answer, reminding the baby that their father is waiting for them to finish. The baby chirps a happy "okay," while Julius keeps a watchful eye on the door to avoid further interruption. Michael's intimidating presence looms in the doorway as he notes Julius's unusual concern for his baby sister, Elizabeth. Surrounded by a menacing purple aura, Michael terrifies the nearby servant with his cold and silent, piercing gaze. Michael stoically picks up the tiny, pink-haired baby, the nursery falling into a tense and heavy silence once again. Baby Elizabeth feels a surge of relief, realizing her father seemingly failed to notice her recent magical slip-up. Julius wears a faint, relieved smile, glad that the tense situation with his father has finally de-escalated. Holding the tiny baby, Michael stares down at Julius with a calm but unwavering intensity in his golden eyes. Michael commands Julius to join them, and the boy accepts the order with a respectful and determined acknowledgement. Resting in her crib, baby Elizabeth observes that her brother can finally speak to their father without trembling. A brown-haired maid trembles in fear while preparing a bottle, utterly overwhelmed by Michael's terrifying and oppressive presence. Elizabeth happily drinks from her bottle, enjoying the comforts of her high-status life as a pampered noble infant. The baby lets out a content coo, finding it incredibly easy to adapt to the luxury of her surroundings. Michael and Julius sit at a grand desk, buried under mountains of paperwork as they work together in silence. Julius recalls the blue-haired maid's advice, realizing that helping with work is the most effective way to bond. Michael notes the efficiency of the nights, while Julius listens intently, the two finding a rare moment of synergy. A sharp clack sounds as Michael pauses his writing, shifting the conversation to a much more serious political matter. Julius is overjoyed at the prospect of a break, his chibi form radiating pure happiness after hours of labor. The boy's expression turns somber as he mentions the upcoming inauguration ceremony, marking a major turning point for the Empire. Michael reveals the name Adelina Walzer, his intense gaze suggesting she is someone of immense importance to their future. Michael announces Adelina's new role as chancellor, just as a panicked maid interrupts their private discussion with urgent news. The maid's frantic shouting startles Michael and Julius, her wide-eyed panic indicating a sudden crisis involving the baby. Safe in her golden crib, baby Elizabeth reflects on their impending visit to the grand and intimidating royal palace. Holding a toy bunny, Elizabeth looks grumpy and determined, bracing herself for the complex politics of the imperial court. A chilling memory of Queen Claudia's glowing eyes haunts Elizabeth, reminding her of the woman who ended her life. Narratives describe Lady Adelina's rapid rise to power, fueled by her brilliant mind and the emperor's belief in talent. Adelina's unwavering sense of justice and her refusal to tolerate corruption made her a formidable figure among the elite. Though popular with commoners, Adelina's image remained a mysterious and distant symbol of order within the chaotic imperial capital. The corrupt nobility seethed with hatred as Adelina systematically dismantled their power structures to purge the empire's decay. Elizabeth credits Adelina for providing opportunities to orphans like herself, viewing the Duchess as a savior, despite her reputation. Back in the nursery, the maid reports Elizabeth's strange behavior to the men, puzzled by the baby's musical outbursts. Elizabeth sings a melodic tune, her voice attracting a magical flurry of birds and butterflies to the palace room. Michael is struck by a moment of shocked disbelief, suddenly wondering if his baby daughter is a literal genius. A toy falls as Michael leans over the crib, his protective instincts clashing with his amazement at Elizabeth's talent. A month later, a maid prepares for departure as the family readies themselves for the journey to the palace. Dressed in their finest formal attire, Michael, Julius, and Elizabeth stand ready to face the imperial court together. Elizabeth's eyes sparkle with admiration as she takes in the sight of her father's regal and imposing knight uniform. Leaning against Michael's chest, the baby is hilariously distracted by her father's impressive physique and bulging muscles. A magnificent blue carriage drawn by 4 white steeds gallops across the cobblestones toward the towering palace gates. Michael explains the palace's strict magical contracts for servants, leaving Elizabeth stunned by the level of imperial security. Elizabeth realizes that her previous worries about working were misplaced in the face of such overwhelming palace authority. The family's carriage arrives at the breathtaking royal palace, a sprawling masterpiece of architecture and power. A polished white boot steps onto the palace grounds, signaling the start of their highly anticipated official visit. Michael carries Elizabeth as the group is escorted through the courtyard, the atmosphere heavy with prestige and expectation. Elizabeth feels a wave of nostalgia mixed with fear, recognizing the palace she once served in a former life. As they enter the daunting halls, Elizabeth clings to her father, overwhelmed by the palace's cold and scary energy. Michael asks if Elizabeth needs a diaper change, prompting a loud and embarrassed scream of protest from the baby. A maid leads them toward Lady Adelina's office, the group moving through the opulent and quiet palace corridors. Elizabeth notes that she never had access to these elite administrative areas during her previous existence as a maid. They enter the room, and Michael calls out to Adelina, who reacts with shock to the sight of the baby. Adelina turns around, revealing a weary face with sunken eyes and massive dark circles from endless, grueling work. Close-ups emphasize Adelina's haggard appearance and lifeless hair, painting a picture of a woman pushed to her limit. Elizabeth immediately recognizes the symptoms of severe overwork, seeing her own past struggles mirrored in the exhausted Duchess. Michael suggests that Adelina take a much-needed break, noticing her unhealthy state, while Elizabeth watches them both anxiously. Adelina dismisses the concern, but Elizabeth worries she'll collapse trying to keep up with her father's inhuman stamina. Julius advises his mother not to overwork herself, receiving a gentle smile and a heartfelt thank you in return. Adelina appears completely drained by her duties, while baby Elizabeth begins to piece together a troubling realization about her. Watching her family from Michael's arms, Elizabeth considers whether false rumors have poisoned her mother's perception of her existence. Adelina's expression turns icy as she questions why the thing was brought into her presence, shocking the infant Elizabeth. Michael defends his caring role, while Adelina reacts with explosive anger, her golden eyes flashing with sudden, intense hostility. A sharp crackle of magic fills the room as Adelina demands they remove the child she views with utter contempt. Michael looks away in silent grief as Elizabeth recalls her desperate efforts to protect her family from their impending ruin. Tears well in the infant's eyes as she realizes the crushing weight of being hated by her own mother. Julius watches helplessly while Adelina stares coldly at the daughter whose very name she refuses to even utter aloud. The blue-haired woman screams for the baby to be taken away immediately, her rejection cutting deep into Elizabeth's heart. A heavy silence falls over the men as they process the Duchess's harsh and unexpected outburst of parental hatred. Elizabeth is overwhelmed by the heartbreaking reality that her mother treats her like a complete and unwanted stranger. Michael's face is a mask of stoic sorrow, hiding the pain of his wife's inexplicable coldness toward their child. Preparing for the upcoming ceremony, Michael hands Elizabeth to a maid, his focus shifting back to his imperial duties. Elizabeth watches in disbelief as her father and brother leave her behind in the nursery with the brown-haired maid. A sudden shout from Adelina stops them as she frantically demands they take the child with them after all. Michael turns back toward the room, the group lingering in the doorway as a tense and confusing standoff continues. Adelina leans over her desk in exhaustion, while Elizabeth grumbles about the Duchess's dramatic and inconsistent behavior today. The maid places the basket down as Adelina coldly orders her to stop moving the baby's cradle around needlessly. While preparing a bottle, the maid silently judges Adelina for treating her own child like a mere inanimate object. Left alone in the basket, Elizabeth's attention is captured by a mysterious, glowing document resting on the grand desk. Seizing the moment the maid leaves for tea, Elizabeth uses her magic to levitate the glowing and important papers. With a focused gaze, the pink-haired baby extends her tiny hand, her magical aura pulling the document closer. A sudden flash of purple light erupts as Adelina's hand snaps out, intercepting the paper mid-air with a sharp grab. Adelina examines the paper with a faint, weary smile, leaving Elizabeth wondering about the contents of the secret document. The office falls quiet as the blue-haired woman stands over the baby's basket, lost in her own complicated thoughts. The sound of clinking porcelain signals the maid's return with tea, interrupting Elizabeth's curiosity about her mother's work. A shadowy memory reveals petals being dropped into a pot as part of a plot to infiltrate the household. A hooded figure threatens the brown-haired maid, using her daughter as leverage to force her into a deadly betrayal. Elizabeth remembers a flower from the palace archives that serves as medicine in small doses, but kills in large ones. A horrifying vision of Adelina coughing up blood flashes through Elizabeth's mind, confirming the tea is a deadly poison. Terror grips the baby as she watches her mother reach for the cup, the floating document forgotten in the crisis. The brown-haired maid approaches with a trembling hand, her face shadowed by the immense guilt of her forced mission. Adelina directs the maid to set the tray down, oblivious to the newcomer's sickly and extremely pale facial complexion. Elizabeth watches the maid closely, noting her terrified expression and the ominous presence of the tea set she carries. A sharp gasp escapes the baby as a premonition of death consumes her, her blue eyes wide with panic. Elizabeth desperately hopes the vision was just a nightmare, while her mother brings the poisoned cup to her lips. The baby's heart sinks as she realizes the floral scent from the tea matches the lethal poison she vividly recalled. Determined to save her mother, Elizabeth prepares to manifest a magical clone to physically stop the impending tragedy. A blonde-haired man enters, announcing it's time to change, providing a sudden distraction that stops Adelina from drinking. The maid's suspicious behavior doesn't escape the notice of the newcomer as he steps into the tense and quiet office. As they cross paths, the blonde man casts a sharp, distrusting glance at the departing and visibly shaken maid. With a sudden, forceful grab, the blonde man takes the baby's basket, startling the maid with his aggressive movement. He firmly declares that he will keep the child with him, his golden-eyed gaze fixed on the nervous servant. The atmosphere grows heavy as the man begins to explain a hypothetical scenario involving the serving of tea. His voice remains calm but menacing as he mentions the act of serving tea, pinning the maid with his stare. The baby with red eyes chirps that tea was already served, while the blonde man questions the maid's actions. With chilling blue eyes, the man dismisses the maid's excuses, telling her it's time for her to take rest. I cannot read that text aloud. Gasping her final breath, the maid collapses while a horrified Elizabeth watches the brutal execution from the floor below. Elizabeth's internal voice questions the suspicious presence of the blonde palace servant standing before her with a basket. Michael and Julius walk together through the expansive, blue-carpeted palace hallway, their presence demanding respect and authority. Julius looks up at his father with an expression of deep concern, bringing up the topic of Elizabeth's safety. Michael pauses and turns his head, acknowledging his son's worry with a stoic and steady gaze as they walk. As they stride forward, the narrative reflects on whether Michael has truly accepted the complex reality of their situation. A sudden, chilling memory of a violent blood spatter flashes through Michael's mind, causing his sharp green eyes to widen. Michael senses an ominous energy and urgently tells Julius they must return, his focus shifting back to his daughter. The blonde servant stands over a fallen, bleeding maid while holding Elizabeth's basket, the baby watching in pure terror. The dying woman asks why he committed this betrayal, but the blonde man coldly dismisses her as a fool. A close-up reveals the blonde man's icy gaze, his lack of remorse showing through his handsome yet dangerous features. With her final breath, the brown-haired maid reaches for the servant's leg, desperately whispering a plea for her lady. The blonde man reacts with intense disgust, snarling at the dying woman as he prepares to shake her off. He violently kicks the maid away and stomps past her, callously ignoring her suffering while carrying the kidnapped infant. Elizabeth's terror peaks as she begs for the violence to stop, her tiny hands reaching out from her basket. A powerful scream of "Stop!" and "Wah!" erupts from the baby, signaling a sudden, desperate release of ancient magic. A blinding burst of blue magical energy explodes from Elizabeth, forcefully throwing the blonde man backward down the hallway. The basket floats precariously in mid-air as a hand reaches out toward the brilliant light to rescue the child. The wounded maid uses her remaining strength to shield and catch the basket as it descends safely to the floor. Michael and Julius race toward the source of the disturbance, Michael sensing the massive wave of mana that erupted. They arrive to find the aftermath of the explosion, Michael realizing his premonition of imperial danger was absolutely correct. Julius rushes to retrieve Elizabeth while Michael stands over the bodies, his figure imposing against the palace's cold light. A close-up of Elizabeth's shocked face reveals her absolute horror at the excessive amount of blood staining the carpet. Michael commands Julius to take Elizabeth away immediately, his voice firm as he prepares to handle the grim scene. Michael kneels by the maid as Julius holds Elizabeth, the group surrounded by the heavy atmosphere of the hall. Examining the blonde man, Michael notes the high probability that the assassin chose to end his life with poison. Julius holds Elizabeth close, his face etched with worry as he calls her name to provide some small comfort. Standing side by side, Michael and Julius look upon the baby, the immediate danger having finally been neutralized. Elizabeth remains inconsolable, her small body shaking with hiccups and tears after witnessing the brutal and traumatic violence. A close-up of the baby's tearful green eyes captures her profound sadness and the lingering fear from the attack. The royal hallway echoes with Elizabeth's loud and mournful wailing as she releases the built-up tension of the ordeal. Julius clutches his sister tightly, the narrative noting that in this moment, he didn't fully grasp the unfolding tragedy. As Michael leads them away, the baby reflects that her primary and most overwhelming emotion was simply pure fear. Guards arrive to attend to the bodies, while the narrative admits that the child was too scared to understand. Elizabeth continues to cry in her brother's arms, her face buried against his shoulder in a display of helplessness. Michael takes Elizabeth into his arms, his expression solemn, while the memory of her in the basket lingers below. The narrative compares this feeling to the mansion, as Julius mentions that Elizabeth has never cried like this before. Julius watches his sister with concern, noting the unprecedented intensity of her crying following the servant's violent death. Michael looks troubled until a guard arrives with an urgent report, announcing that Lady Adelina is confirmed safe. Michael listens with a stern face as the guard confirms the bleeding has been stopped and the situation is controlled. A gloved hand displays pink flower petals, identifying them as the lethal evidence found on the dead female servant. Michael's expression transforms into one of cold, calculating fury as he processes the evidence of the assassination attempt. Clenching his fist, Michael decides to keep the petals as he gives a stern acknowledgement to the reporting guard. Michael and Julius walk toward their next destination, Julius calling out to his father as they leave the scene. Michael issues a final, authoritative command to provide Lady Adelina with significantly more guards for her future protection. A sense of relief washes over Julius, who smiles at the thought of finally returning to the academy. A close-up of Michael's lips captures the beginning of a menacing warning directed at his family's hidden enemies. Michael's eyes burn with a terrifying resolve, promising that anyone who makes an enemy of his family will regret it. Elizabeth wipes away her final tears, her expression turning pensive as the narrative describes her sudden moment of realization. Michael holds Elizabeth at the grand ceremony while Julius stands nearby, the narrative noting that Adelina's appointment is finished. Adelina stands radiantly in a beautiful blue dress, smiling gracefully at the crowd as she officially assumes her new title. Julius asks if Elizabeth is awake, as her blue eye snaps open, startling the two brothers with her sudden movement. Michael tries to soothe the fussing baby while Julius watches, Elizabeth's wide eyes reflecting her lingering distress and confusion. Michael pulls Elizabeth into a protective embrace, the baby finding some small comfort against his chest following the ordeal. Noble bystanders watch from a distance as Michael holds Elizabeth, while Julius stands nearby on the red-carpeted palace hall. Guests whisper about the battlefield demon's surprising doting behavior, while Michael remains stoic under their judgmental and curious gazes. Adelina, dressed in an elegant blue gown, appears troubled, while Michael remains focused on protecting his daughter from further harm. Elizabeth clutches at the fabric of her mother's dress,
her expression somber as she processes the traumatic palace events.
A brown-haired woman lies peacefully asleep in a sunlit room, her features softening as she recovers from recent trauma. The woman remains deep in slumber, beneath a heavy floral blanket, as warm light filters through the grand palace windows. A dark-haired man watches over the sleeping woman, asking if she is finally waking up from her long ordeal. Sitting up abruptly, the woman gasps for help for her ladyship, her face twisted in a state of frantic panic. The dark-haired man reassures the trembling maid that the commander's daughter is safe and out of immediate danger. Overwhelmed with relief, the brown-haired maid sheds tears of joy upon learning the child survived the brutal assassin's attack. The maid rests back on her pillows while the servants stand by, the tense atmosphere finally beginning to dissipate. Michael examines pink petals held in a cloth, while a guard reports their failure to find evidence inside the palace. Michael acknowledges the report while holding Elizabeth, questioning the true motives behind the female servants' attempted betrayal of their family. Elizabeth looks out with a knowing gaze, her internal voice reflecting on the lies surrounding the deadly flower poison plot. In a moment of quiet reflection, Elizabeth clutches her golden dress, her mind racing with the weight of her secrets. Michael resolves to review the magical contracts of all palace servants to prevent any future assassination attempts against his daughter. Julius asks about the fate of the intruder, while the palace guards stand ready to follow Michael's new, strict commands. Elizabeth finds temporary peace in her father's arms, though her thoughts suggest the danger is far from truly over. Adelina reacts with explosive anger, shouting at Michael for bringing the child to such a dangerous location without proper protection. Julius tries to calm his mother, while Elizabeth watches Adelina's distress with a look of pure, heart-wrenching sadness and regret. Julius holds a crying Elizabeth, her internal thoughts noting the palpable dislike emanating from the approaching figure in the hallway. Framed portraits show Michael's gentle moments with Elizabeth, capturing the rare soft side of the otherwise stoic and cold commander. Adelina stands with arms crossed, her sharp yellow eyes fixed on the man standing before her in the palace hallway. A blonde woman in a blue gown arrives, announcing her presence as Adelina and Michael turn to face her. Queen Claudia stands regally in a black lace-trimmed blue dress, her presence looming over the room like an ominous shadow. Elizabeth is gripped by a sudden, chilling memory of the Queen's past actions, her eyes wide with terrifying recognition. Queen Claudia glides through the room, her unchanged appearance sending a shock of pure terror through the observant, purple-haired baby. Elizabeth reminds herself of her new identity, desperately trying to mask her past life's knowledge from the powerful woman. Adelina addresses the first queen, questioning her preparations for the upcoming evening ball in a cold and formal tone. Queen Claudia looks on with a calm, stoic expression, her blue eyes revealing nothing of her true, hidden intentions. Adelina remains respectful yet guarded as the queen explains her sudden need to rush over and check the situation. The first queen mentions the attempted kidnapping, her gaze shifting toward the child held tightly in the commander's arms. Adelina sharply dismisses the need for the first queen's interference, using her fan to punctuate her authority and annoyance. Queen Claudia hides her face behind a red fan, her eyes crinkling as if amused by the ongoing family tension. The queen's presence feels suffocatingly heavy, her hidden smile conveying a sense of dangerous, underlying power and dark intent. A faceless memory of Michael holding the baby appears as the queen looks down at the royal pair with calculation. Elizabeth senses an overwhelmingly weird vibe from the first queen, her tiny body tensing in her father's protective arms. Adelina declares her lack of interest in anyone's life, except for the waltzer heir, her golden eyes burning with resolve. Elizabeth cowers against Michael's shoulder as Adelina and Queen Claudia engage in their silent, high-stakes royal power struggle. Michael and Julius watch with grim expressions as the political maneuvering between the two queens continues to unfold before them. Queen Claudia remains a picture of poised grace behind her fan, her true thoughts shielded from those around her. Sharp blue eyes meet cold yellow ones in a tense standoff, neither royal woman willing to yield an inch. Elizabeth notes that the bad vibe from Queen Claudia has suddenly vanished, leaving her confused and even more wary. A brown-haired man in a suit accompanies the first queen as she prepares to depart the tense scene. Adelina bows her head in a formal farewell, though her internal monologue reveals a deep, simmering hatred for her rival. Elizabeth concludes that her mother deliberately pushed the first queen away to protect her from a hidden, sinister threat. Adelina watches the queen leave with a cold gaze, while Elizabeth rests safely against Michael's sturdy and protective chest. Adelina stands before a mirror in a lavish red gown while multiple maids attend to her hair. Looking away, Adelina listens as a dark-haired maid promises to handle the upcoming arrangements immediately. A maid carefully adjusts Adelina's jewelry, while the blonde noblewoman maintains a cold and distant gaze. A close-up of Adelina's icy blue eye reveals a flickering memory of Michael holding their young daughter. Adelina commands her maid to message the head court maid, her expression hardening with a new, secret purpose. A menacing smile reflects in the mirror as Adelina's red-gloved hand reaches toward her own haunting reflection. Elizabeth lies peacefully on a large blue rug, a small bell and pink rabbit toy resting nearby. The purple-haired baby rolls over onto her side, successfully navigating the soft textures of the carpeted floor. With a determined look, Elizabeth rolls across the floor, celebrating her growing physical strength and coordination. Elizabeth proudly holds her own bottle, marveling at how she no longer needs magic to grasp objects. Drinking her milk, the baby reflects on the glimpse of her future she saw during the traumatic attack. A brown-haired maid pushes Elizabeth's ornate gold carriage through the palace's lush and sun-drenched gardens. Looking down at the baby, the maid expresses her deep gratitude that Elizabeth survived the recent kidnapping attempt. A flashback reveals Michael permitted healing magic for the maid, a rare exception to protect his daughter's caretaker. The narrative notes the maid was rewarded for risking her life, though Elizabeth still wonders about the details. The brown-haired maid beams with a warm and genuine smile, her eyes sparkling with newfound joy and loyalty. Elizabeth looks up with wide, intelligent blue eyes, her tiny hands clasped as she processes her family's history. Shocked, Elizabeth realizes that her efforts for Operation Get Along with Dad might actually be working after all. Julius stands in the garden, looking inquisitive, while Elizabeth and her maid watch the pink-haired boy approach them. Julius enters Michael's office where the commander works at his desk, followed by a maid carrying little Elizabeth. Michael looks up from his desk, holding a stamp over official documents with a stern and professional air. Michael informs Julius that his swordsmanship training resumes tomorrow, the announcement catching the young boy by surprise. Julius agrees to return to the academy as the maid carries a sleepy Elizabeth through the palace hallway. Julius tells his father that Adelina must have her reasons, standing before Michael with a respectful yet concerned posture. Julius looks down with a somber expression, quietly acknowledging the heavy expectations placed upon his young shoulders. Julius watches his sister with a gentle gaze, while Elizabeth smiles brightly from the safety of her maid's arms. Michael watches his son and daughter depart, reflecting on the complex emotional state of his wife, Adelina. A rainy memory shows Michael questioning if he should get close to others, his eyes filled with sorrow. Michael returns to his work, the scene highlighting the cold distance he maintains from his own children. A gray-haired man in spectacles announcing that an urgent messenger has arrived from the royal palace. Elizabeth's blue eyes snaps wide in shock as she hears the news about the unexpected palace messenger. While Julius holds her, Elizabeth wonders if the palace has finally uncovered information about the attack on Adelina. The baby looks intensely curious, her mind racing with questions about the royal family's true, hidden involvement. Julius tells Elizabeth to stop worrying for now, his expression turning firm as he tries to protect her. A terrifying image of Michael's glowing green eyes looms over Elizabeth, causing the baby to let out a panicked cry. Julius asks to be excused, hurrying away with the fussing baby while Michael watches them with growing concern. A man in glasses stands ready to present his report as Michael approaches him with a cold stare. Michael looks down at the sleeping Elizabeth in her blue cradle, the moonlight casting long shadows across the room. Julius imagines the blue-haired maid floating through the air like a magical guardian, stars shimmering around her. Julius discusses the palace report with the blue-haired maid, both of them sharing a moment of quiet reflection. The blue-haired maid looks startled when Julius asks if she can foresee the future, her green eyes wide. The narrative explains that the future is only known from the memories of Liz, the commoner's past life. Julius tells the blue-haired maid he doesn't blame her, while a candle flickers beside a stack of books. Julius leans against a railing at night, looking out at the darkened garden with a look of determination. Julius vows to practice his swordsmanship, even as the blue-haired maid expresses surprise at his unexpected struggle. The maid admits she thought Julius was perfect, but he reveals swordsmanship is his only academic failure. Julius gazes at his hands, promising to try harder so he can effectively protect everyone he loves. The blue-haired maid suddenly asks to go to the academy with Julius, her expression firm and resolute. Standing with her hand over her heart, the maid declares her own strong desire to protect the Waltzer family. A close-up of the blue-haired maid's bright green eyes captures her sincere and unwavering loyalty to her master. Julius gazes downward, his heart heavy as he questions what truly happened to the original Elizabeth. The blue-haired maid stands in the soft light of the palace, her expression filled with quiet, sorrowful contemplation. Julius offers a bittersweet smile as he looks at his baby sister, deciding to leave her secrets buried for now. A heavy silence hangs in the air while the loyal maid processes the weight of Julius's unspoken understanding. Clatter! The ornate royal carriage rolls across the stone courtyard as the family begins their journey to the academy. Inside the carriage, Michael remains stoic and distant, while Julius looks away, a sleeping Elizabeth resting nearby in her basket. Julius remains quiet as they travel, the memory of his father's hesitation to bring the baby lingering in his mind. Michael reflects on the household's emptiness, deciding that Elizabeth's presence at the academy is necessary to keep her from loneliness. Michael's sharp gaze lingers on his children, his cold exterior momentarily softening as he watches them together. Elizabeth looks up with wide, shimmering eyes, unaware that her innocent charm has just metaphorically pierced through her father's cold heart. The massive and prestigious El Tod Royal Academy comes into view, standing as a grand sanctuary for the kingdom's noble youth. Michael informs Julius of the Titan security, explaining that the estate's knights must return to their posts at the palace. Looking resolute, Michael declares that bringing Elizabeth to the academy is the only way to ensure her absolute safety. A sudden, brilliant light filters through the lush trees as the party finally arrives at the prestigious institution. Baby Elizabeth relaxes in her woven basket, lulled by the carriage's movement, as Michael keeps a watchful eye over her. Julius consults a childcare manual, earnestly suggesting that the baby needs plenty of exercise to grow strong and healthy. Elizabeth's tiny face scrunches in pure horror as Michael casually suggests she begin her training with sword-swinging practice. Julius quickly intervenes, assuring the panicked baby that she is far too young for such rigorous physical training. Phew. Julius' imagination runs wild with images of intense night training, while a defiant Elizabeth flatly rejects the ridiculous idea. Upon their arrival, Michael carries the baby as they are greeted by a brown-haired woman waiting outside the academy entrance. An oppressive aura flares around Michael as he fixes a cold, menacing stare on the person standing before him. Julius beams with pride, looking down at his sister with a warm and genuinely affectionate smile. The group moves toward the massive academy doors, with Michael and the woman leading the way into the building. Julius navigates the sunlit halls of the academy, carefully carrying Elizabeth in her portable basket. A shimmering magical transformation reveals the blue-haired maid in an elegant new dress, catching Julius completely off guard. Julius stares in amazement, shocked that his loyal maid possesses the magical ability to change her attire so effortlessly. The maid explains her magical wardrobe with a playful wink, while Julius marvels at the sheer convenience of her powers. The pair continues through the academy, with the maid now taking over the responsibility of carrying Elizabeth's basket. They step into the sprawling academy library, a magnificent chamber filled with countless volumes that rival the royal collection. The maid gazes around the massive library in awe, her eyes sparkling as she takes in the infinite rows of books. While browsing, the maid's hand brushes against a glowing pink tome, triggering a sudden and jarring shock of recognition. A distant memory flickers to life, showing a man waving a book from a high window to a younger, observant girl. The vision shifts, revealing an older, stern Julius commanding a nervous-looking man to follow him. The past and present blur as the man's voice echoes, greeting someone with a cheerful announcement of his return. A heartbreaking memory reveals the young maid crying on the floor, clutching a book while blood trickles down her forehead. Back in the present, the maid stands paralyzed in the library, the old book in her hands stirring forgotten pain. Julius notices her distress and asks what's wrong, but she quickly masks her trauma and offers a nervous denial. The maid suggests donating the worn book to an orphanage, her voice trembling slightly as she hides her true feelings. Julius announces it's time to head to the training grounds, leaving the maid troubled by a growing sense of unease. Watching Julius walk away, the maid wonders if his dislike for swordsmanship stems from something much deeper and darker. She recalls the instructor's cruel methods, where he would physically assault students under the thin guise of special training. Julius once bravely tried to stop the abuse, only to find himself the next target of the instructor's clenching fist. A sinister, toothy grin greets them as a man looms, mockingly addressing Julius Waltzer after their long time apart. The malicious man continues his taunting greeting, his cold eyes fixed on Julius and the wary maid. The instructor stands tall with a dark, mocking presence, his name for Julius hanging ominously in the air. Fear grips a maid as she realizes this man is the same villainous figure she saw in a prophetic vision. A tense, heavy silence descends upon the hallway as the group stands frozen before the predator. The instructor asks if Julius will be joining the day's training, his smile conveying a hidden, cruel intent. With a joyful exclamation that feels chillingly wrong, the instructor expresses his excitement for the fun ahead. The maid watches with deep apprehension as the instructor steps forward, prepared to begin Julius's grueling and dangerous lesson. The brown-haired instructor looms over Julius, mockingly claiming he always prays for the boy's success. With a sinister gaze, the instructor admits he prays for Julius to become a blood-bathed monster. The instructor waves a fake farewell, leaving the wary maid and Julius standing in the academy hallway. Trembling with rage, the blue-haired maid reflects on how the man insulted both Julius and his father. Watching the instructor walk away, the maid's anger peaks as she recalls him calling Michael a monster. The maid's eyes burn with magical intent as she recalls the instructor's resemblance to a past life enemy. Julius explains that while he doesn't regret defying the instructor, he cannot defeat the former knight alone. Julius's expression darkens as he mentions how the man insulted his mother's political status as prime minister. Clenching her fist, the blue-haired maid curses the useless instructor for his blatant cruelty and lack of respect. A memory shows the maid's past life as a civil servant, dealing with an arrogant magic power supremacist. Back in the past, she works tirelessly at her desk, while her incompetent coworker pushes his responsibilities onto her. Julius expresses his desire to handle his own burdens without troubling his busy parents with the instructor's abuse. Clenching his fist, Julius asks the maid to simply watch over him as he prepares for his lesson. The scene shifts to the training grounds, where several students lie defeated on the floor before the instructor. Surrounded by distressed students, the blue-haired maid begs the instructor to stop his violent treatment of the youth. Standing amidst shimmering light and flowers, and Julius prepares for his duel with a look of quiet, unwavering determination. Clang! The instructor parries Julius's attack, coldly lecturing him about the necessity of physical sacrifice for one's country. Boom! The instructor lands a heavy, magical blow on Julius's side, his face twisted in a malicious, toothy grin. Julius staggers back, clutching his torso and gasping for air as the morning sun shines brightly over the academy. Julius groans as the instructor strikes again, mockingly promising not to scar the young master's pretty face. The blue-haired maid and the other students watch in horrified silence as Julius continues to take a beating. Torn by her promise to Julius, the maid watches his suffering with wide eyes and a look of deep conflict. A sudden burst of violent energy fills the frame, underscoring the narrator's realization that the situation is too cruel. Julius lies face down on the dusty floor, his clothes torn and stained from the instructor's relentless assault. From a low angle, the maid watches Julius struggle, recalling his promise that he would not lose this fight. Closing her eyes, the maid contemplates her place in the family while watching Julius's hand twitch on the floor. Pushing himself up, Julius refuses to stay down, his determination visible even through the grime on his face. Julius's yellow eyes glow with a fierce, predatory intensity as he prepares to mount a final, desperate counterattack. Standing tall against a radiant light, Julius's silhouette embodies his internal struggle to overcome his weaknesses and fears. A flashback reveals a young, innocent Julius playing on the floor, yearning to one day be like his father. Memories show Julius practicing his forms alone, driven by the desire to obtain his father's unshakable, legendary strength. Wiping blood from his lip, Julius admits to himself that he once hated the path of the sword. The blue-haired maid's eyes sparkle with newfound purpose as she declares she has a reason to get stronger. Julius offers a small, bloody smile, thinking of his baby sister and his responsibility to protect her, always. Reaching for his sword, Julius reaffirms his promise to achieve strength and protect those he loves dearly. Pushing off the ground, Julius prepares to surpass his past self and achieve the victory he so desperately needs. With a determined shout, Julius lunges forward, his body wreathed in a brilliant, shimmering aura of white light. The instructor's smirk vanishes as he sees the terrifying resolve in Julius's eyes during their high-speed clashing exchange. This is it! Julius strikes with incredible speed, his blade glowing as he finally reaches the mocking instructor's guard. Whoa! The students cheer in amazement as Julius manages to land a clean, shallow cut across the instructor's cheek. Clang! The instructor drops his sword in rage, his face contorted as he begins gathering green magical energy. The instructor cheats by using magic in the duel, causing Julius to scream as blood splatters across the floor. Roaring for silence, the instructor calls the magical assault a necessary lesson for the defiant young noble brats. The instructor's eyes glow with green malice as he prepares to strike again, calling Julius a monster's child. The blue-haired maid leaps into action, shielding the fallen Julius with a shimmering hexagonal magical barrier. The instructor charges forward with a massive energy blast, while the maid realizes her own magic is failing her. Crack! A massive explosion of green and pink magical energy erupts, tearing through the air of the training grounds. The sky above the prestigious academy turns a deep blue as the echoes of the magical clash fade away. Standing amidst the settling dust and smoke, the instructor breaths heavily and mockingly says the brat got what he deserved. The instructor laughs at his victory, but his joy is cut short by a sudden, confused gasp of surprise. Duke Michael Waltzer arrives with a commanding presence, his red hair matching the intensity of his stern expression. Michael unleashes a blinding green energy blast with a thunderous boom as he strikes the training grounds. Battered and bruised, Julius gazes at his father, while the instructor cowers in the wake of such power. Michael begins to walk away, his cape billowing behind him as Julius and the maid watch in silence. Pausing for a moment, Michael looks back with a sharp, silent gaze that chills the air around them. Michael demands to know the source of the commotion, causing the terrified instructor to stutter out his name. With a deceitful, nervous grin, the instructor tries to claim he was simply providing routine swordsmanship education. Michael's eyes flash with a dangerous light as he mockingly questions the instructor's definition of proper education. The instructor tries to confirm his lie, but Michael's fist begins to glow with an incinerating yellow energy. Boom! Michael's punch connects with a violent force, sending the instructor hurtling through the air with a cry. Michael stands wreathed in a dark aura, while the instructor crashes into the distance after the one-sided beatdown. The instructor hits the ground with a heavy thud as Michael looks down on him with utter disdain. Surrounded by cheering students, Elizabeth watches the scene from her basket, her purple hair glowing in the sunlight. Elizabeth breathes a sigh of relief, realizing she successfully hid her magical intervention within the chaotic dust cloud. Hidden by the dust, Elizabeth successfully transformed back into a baby, hoping Michael didn't witness her secret powers. Elizabeth plays innocent in her basket, acting cute as a flustered Michael approaches to check on her. Trembling with emotion, Julius admits he feels a deep anger toward his own weakness, while Michael listens intently. Michael looks upon his son with a mixture of pride and sternness as Julius vents his inner frustrations. Michael places a hand on Julius's head, advising him to never forget the burning desire to become stronger. The father promises that this pain will eventually transform into the legendary strength Julius so desperately craves. Standing tall, Julius swears to protect his little sister, while Elizabeth watches with tears of affection in her eyes. In the medical area, the blue-haired maid tends to Julius's wounds as the other students begin their recovery. The instructor groans in pain until Michael silences him by stepping on his head with a sharp crunch. Michael towers over the fallen man with an expression of pure, cold malice that leaves no room for mercy. With a dark smile, Michael compares the instructor to a nuisance insect that no one would bother to save. Michael coldly orders the nearby students to clean up the mess left by the broken and defeated instructor. Julius holds Elizabeth, watching the aftermath, while the students hurry to obey the Duke's stern command. Elizabeth grumbles internally, her green eyes fixed on her brother as she analyzes his complicated emotional state. Elizabeth reflects on why she failed to use magic earlier, wondering if the shock of the situation paralyzed her. Julius gazes down at Elizabeth while his hand glows with a faint, shimmering light of untapped magical potential. Elizabeth stares up at Julius with wide, analytical eyes, reconsidering the brotherly bond they share in this life. Despite his injuries and the grime on his face, Julius offers Elizabeth a warm and genuinely affectionate smile. A sudden, soft shuffle sounds as a brown-haired student approaches Julius with a look of extreme hesitation. Elizabeth watches as the girl offers Julius medicine, only for her brother's expression to turn cold and sharp. The brown-haired girl shyly offers Julius a healing ointment, hoping to help him with his many visible injuries. A vision of a sprawling white palace appears, identifying the girl as an exchange student from a distant land. Julius abruptly calls the girl an eyesore, his sudden cruelty toward others shocking the observant and young Elizabeth. Elizabeth realizes that Julius's kindness is a rare gift reserved solely for family, as she watches his cold dismissal. Looking around the academy halls, Elizabeth acknowledges Julius as her true brother, despite his many social flaws. Memories of a past life show a harsher Julius, who only showed kindness to the kingdom's crown prince. Elizabeth hopes that Julius will remain kind to her, simply because they are bound by the ties of family. A sense of unease washes over Elizabeth as she senses a dark, looming shadow over her brother's future. Elizabeth realizes that Michael's influence wasn't the only reason Julius grew up to be so cold and distant. Julius looks down at his sister with a questioning gaze, unaware of the deep thoughts swirling in her mind. Elizabeth gasps as a realization strikes her. She must act quickly to change the course of Julius's life. A humorous chart illustrates Julius's terrible social skills, proving he would fail any exam on building relationships. The chart continues, showing Julius rejecting apologies with a blunt, cold efficiency that leaves classmates feeling completely ignored. Julius fails spectacularly at social interactions, leaving Elizabeth in despair as she imagines his future as a social pariah. The brown-haired girl watches Julius from afar, her silent gaze suggesting she may be more important than she seems. Elizabeth realizes the clock is ticking, and she must hurry to save her brother from his own cold nature. Julius and the blue-haired maid stand by the crib where the purple-haired Elizabeth sleeps, surrounded by father's gifts. The maid reflects on how the stuffed chick, Aripio, has become perfectly attuned to her magic over time. Holding the toy aloft, the blue-haired maid glows with a cheerful energy as she plans her next move. Thoughts of the academy and the exchange student, Tesua, inspire the maid to find a way to help Julius. She explains that imbuing the toy with magic allows her to accompany Julius even while he is at school. Julius listens with a conflicted expression as the maid offers him the magically enhanced check with a kind smile. Julius reaffirms his oath to protect his little sister, accepting the toy as a vital link between them. The blue-haired maid blushes with joy, touched that Julius still regards her as his sister despite everything. A sudden voice interrupts their conversation as Julius and the maid turn toward the large, ornate double doors. Duke Michael enters the room with a stern but calm presence, immediately drawing his son's full attention. Surveying the nursery, Michael mentions he heard voices and questions if something unusual is happening in the room. Julius offers a quick, nervous explanation, claiming he was simply talking to himself while his father watches him. Michael discusses the arrival of Tesua, the exchange student, while Elizabeth reflects on the hidden dangers of palace tea. Julius agrees to his father's request, promising to make a genuine effort to befriend the Merchant Guild's son. Standing alone after his father's departure, Julius stares at the nursery doors, feeling the weight of his new responsibility. Elizabeth sits up in her crib, her wide green eyes fixed analytically on the yellow stuffed chick beside her. Julius panics, realizing Elizabeth witnessed his private talk, while the baby mentally confirms she knows everything he said. Looking flustered, Julius stares at the sparkling chick as he contemplates his baby sister's surprisingly deep level of awareness. Blushing heavily, Julius desperately asks his infant sister for advice on how to improve his failing social skills. The scene shifts to the prestigious academy, its grand architecture standing tall under a clear, bright blue sky. Tesua Najul Lars is introduced as an exchange student from the distant Bian kingdom, sitting alone in his classroom. Tesua cowers in fear as Julius approaches his desk, the yellow chick perched confidently on the red-haired boy's shoulder. Seeing Tesua's terrified reaction, Julius tells the chick that he intends to initiate a conversation with the boy first. The chick is utterly horrified, realizing Julius's plan for friendship is just another blunt, aggressive social failure. Julius walks through the academy halls with the bird, drawing the admiration and attention of his many female classmates. The chick spots Tesua hiding in the hallway and encourages Julius to use Arapio to bridge the social gap. Sitting alone on a garden bench, Tesua attempts to eat his lunch in peace, away from the other students. Julius looms over the startled exchange student, whose face turns pale as he nearly drops his large sandwich. Julius asks if Tesua always eats alone while the chick celebrates having successfully tracked down the elusive boy. Julius sits down beside the terrified Tesua, who freezes in place as a dark shadow of anxiety crosses him. Elizabeth realizes this is a perfect opportunity for Julius to bond with his classmate as they sit together quietly. Sweating and blushing profusely, Tesua manages to thank Julius for the help he provided during their swordsmanship class. Julius dismisses the thanks with a blushing tsundere attitude, causing the chick to realize he is actually feeling embarrassed. Suddenly, Arapio slips and falls from Julius's shoulder, tumbling toward the ground in a frantic, blurred motion. Julius shouts Elizabeth's name in a sudden panic, while the confused Tesua wonders why he is yelling at a toy. Back at the palace, a brown-haired maid cradles a sickly Elizabeth, whose face is flushed with a high fever. Ugh! Groans in pain as the terrified maid screams for someone to help the suffering young lady. Michael and the maid rush through the palace halls, the Duke demanding a doctor for his ailing young daughter. Michael gazes at Elizabeth's glowing green eye with a grim expression, noting the chaotic state of her overflowing mana. Julius burst into the nursery with a frantic shout, desperately calling out for Elizabeth and asking for her safety. The brown-haired maid shushes the yelling Julius, explaining that the doctor has ordered the young lady to rest quietly. Julius and Elizabeth share a long, silent gaze as the baby recovers from the physical toll of her magic. Wreathed in a dark, threatening aura, Julius promises his sister they will have a very serious talk later on. Julius leans over the crib, demanding to know the truth of what happened during the incident he witnessed earlier. In a desperate move to investigate, Elizabeth attempted to manifest a magical clone in the image of the maid. A brilliant flash erupts as the magical construct begins to dissolve, far too much for an infant's body to handle. A massive surge of white magical energy overflows from the crib, overwhelming Elizabeth's tiny, developing physical form. The baby lies exhausted and weakened in her crib, the heavy strain of the transformation taking its toll. Entering the nursery, the brown-haired maid gasps in sheer horror at the sight of the sickly, unconscious young lady. The blue-haired maid looks on with deep concern, resting her hand over her heart, while Julius stands behind her. Julius reassures the maid that his father considers the baby's unstable mana a temporary issue that will soon pass. A look of sudden realization crosses Julius's face as his golden eyes widen, remembering that Elizabeth is still an infant. A shimmering, magical silhouette of the maid appears before Julius, prompting him to ask if Elizabeth's mana is unstable again. Julius recoils in surprise as a sudden, brilliant flash of white light erupts through the center of the nursery. Julius stares down at the purple-haired Elizabeth in her crib, sternly forbidding her from ever using clone magic again. Elizabeth lets out a shocked cry as Julius leans over the crib, her wide green eyes reflecting her disbelief. Julius sighs and explains that creating a clone is abnormal magic, and she was never supposed to use it. A hand firmly squeezes the yellow stuffed chick, causing the soft toy to squish with a muffled sound. Julius holds the bird toy near the crib, while Elizabeth reaches out toward it, surrounded by cheerful, sparkling stars. The scene shifts to the Grand Academy building, where a brown-haired girl and a boy chat happily during lunch. Julius walks through the halls with the yellow bird on his shoulder, trying to appear cool despite his sister's advice. Julius opens a classroom door with a sharp "Gotcha!" sound, surprising the students gathered inside the ornate room. A brown-haired student sweats nervously as Julius approaches, while the chick encourages its brother to offer a friendly greeting. Julius offers a curt, sleepy greeting to the startled brown-haired boy, who looks back with a mixture of fear and confusion. Julius continues walking past the students, his cold and detached manner leaving a heavy, awkward silence in his wake. Elizabeth praises Julius for his social growth through the chick, causing her brother to blush and tell her to hush. In a sun-drenched classroom, an instructor points to a large map, while the yellow chick watches from a desk. The brown-haired exchange student, Tesua, takes meticulous notes while Julius watches him from the back of the class. Outside on the manicured academy grounds, Julius approaches Tesua to apologize for cutting their previous conversation short. Tesua stammers a nervous reply while sweating profusely, much to the surprise of the little chick perched on Julius's shoulder. Julius mentions Tesua's skill in healing magic, causing the boy to smile warmly while clutching his medicinal plants book. Julius tries to act well-informed with a blushing face, while Elizabeth urges him to be more friendly and open. Tesua shares his dream of combining healing magic with medicinal plants to help as many people as possible. Duke Michael stands over Elizabeth's crib in the quiet blue light of night, instructing the doctor to monitor her. Michael questions the doctor about other potential causes for the baby's mana instability with a serious, searching expression. The doctor warns the Duke that Elizabeth's case is rare and urges him to remain extremely careful with her. Michael gently touches Elizabeth's face as she sleeps, whispering a soft, fatherly plea for her not. Michael gazes down at his daughter, declaring that she will one day become the bright light of the Waltzer family. A faint blue streak appears in Elizabeth's purple hair as she sleeps, a mysterious sign of her burgeoning magical power. The scene returns to the sprawling White Palace, where Elizabeth's name is called out under the bright morning sun. Julius stands in the middle of the room in his formal school attire, looking ready to face the day. Elizabeth, wearing a blue dress and black headband, grabs the chick toy as Julius mentions the exchange student again. Elizabeth cheers for her brother's successful interaction, holding the yellow bird toy while Julius watches her with a smile. Julius explains that their father allowed him to continue relying on Elizabeth and even introduce her to his friend. Elizabeth laughs with pure joy while holding her toy, but Julius quickly tells her to behave herself. Julius crosses his arms and firmly reminds Elizabeth of the ban on her dangerous and unstable clone magic. Julius looks toward the royal palace, noting his father's absence while Elizabeth watches him intently from her crib. Elizabeth wonders if they should visit their mother's place, worrying that she might be suffering from overwork and exhaustion. The blue-haired maid watches fondly from the doorway as the two siblings hold a strategy meeting for entertaining Tesua. The scene shifts to the Chancellor's grand building. Its blue-roofed towers standing tall against a clear, bright sky. Inside the palace, a blue-haired woman reviews official documents as a messenger announces the arrival of Duke Waltzer. Duke Michael stands tall in a brilliant red military uniform, his expression calm and his presence commanding respect. The blue-haired woman looks up with a smile, thanking Michael for the helpful tea leaves he recently provided. Sipping the pink tea, the woman notes how much lighter her body feels, while Michael remarks on her overwork. Michael advises the woman to rest more, but she insists that commoners like her tire more easily than him. Michael informs the woman that Julius has made a new friend at the academy who is skilled in healing magic. The blue-haired woman smiles and recalls being thanked by a parent for Julius saving a student's life at school. Michael asks her to share such important news sooner, and she promises to do her best in the future. Michael notes that this development will finally silence the nobles who were reluctant to form ties with the Bian Kingdom. While the nobles of Eltoad Kingdom are mostly moderate, a greedy faction plots to profit from the chaos of war. Duke Michael reassures the blue-haired lady that Elizabeth has recovered, dismissing the need for any further medical reports. Michael departs for the night's order, leaving the high-ranking woman to her tea and work in the sunlit office. Outside in a magnificent garden pavilion, Julius and Tesua share an elegant tea party surrounded by lush green trees. Beads of nervous sweat roll down Tesua's face as he sits across from the calm and poised Julius. Julius introduces the wide-eyed Elizabeth to his friend, while the happy baby clutches her favorite yellow stuffed chick toy. Elizabeth lets out a cheerful baby sound, which Julius translated as a friendly greeting to the startled brown-haired boy. Overwhelmed by the baby's adorable expression, Tesua blushes deeply and covers his mouth in a moment of pure adoration. Tesua notes that the tea is from his homeland, sparking a polite and meaningful conversation between the two classmates. The tension begins to fade as Tesua enjoys the delicious spread of sandwiches and tea under the afternoon sun. A look of quiet appreciation crosses Tesua's face as he takes a slow, thoughtful sip of the familiar brew. Close-up of Elizabeth looking up with intense, sparkling eyes, captivated by the social interaction happening before her. Julius explains that their father gave their mother these tea leaves to help her recover from recent overwork. As Julius sips his tea, he mentions his mother's exhaustion, unaware of the sudden movement in the carriage behind him. Tesua bashfully clarifies that the tea wasn't his own research, while Elizabeth watches the boys with a knowing smile. Determined to investigate further, Elizabeth reaches out for a small pink jar, her tiny hand trembling with focused effort. A sudden crash sounds as the jar falls to the floor, startling the boys and shattering the peaceful atmosphere. Julius shouts in panic as he sees Elizabeth struggling in her crib, a mysterious blue glow appearing in her hair.
Tesua explains with a grim expression that Elizabeth's mana is being dangerously depleted by a mysterious and life-threatening condition.
Terror fills Julius's eyes as he asks the brown-haired boy what happens when this magical depletion begins to manifest. The once pleasant tea party turns into a scene of dread as Elizabeth lies motionless in her ornate white carriage. A chilling narrative warning declares that there are no exceptions to the fate brought on by this rare magical affliction. Elizabeth groans in deep physical distress, her small form quivering under the heavy strain of her unstable, overflowing mana. Julius shouts for a doctor at once, commanding the maid to immediately alert their father at the royal palace. Pained sweat beads on Elizabeth's face, while a sinister purple aura begins to pulse around her tiny, vulnerable body. Julius gazes down at his sister with a heartbroken expression, his hand resting near her as she remains unconscious.
Tesua explains that while magic usually sustains life, a rare disease cruelly reverses the process, consuming the body's energy.
A dark silhouette of a woman illustrates the disease's history, leaving Julius terrified as he listens to Tesua's explanation. Haunted by the boy's words, Julius wonders what will happen to Elizabeth as the weight of despair takes hold. Clop, clop! Hooves thunder against the stone as a lone rider races toward the palace at high speed. Duke Michael arrives at the Grand Palace steps, his face set in a grim mask as servants rush out. Rushing inside, the frantic father demands an immediate update on Elizabeth's condition as he is led through the halls. Michael pulls on his white gloves with a sharp, determined motion, preparing himself for the news that awaits him. Following a brown-haired maid through the Grand Palace corridors, Michael's long red uniform billows behind him in his haste. Michael enters the nursery with a commanding presence, asserting that everything will be fine, despite his own obvious worry. The maid opens the heavy doors for the Duke, allowing him to finally reach his ailing daughter's bedside. Julius and Tesua stand back as Michael approaches the crib, the room filled with an oppressive and tense silence. Michael stares at the doctor, his eyes searching for any sign of hope for his daughter's sudden health crisis. The doctor explains that Elizabeth is resting now, thanks to Julius's quick decision to use a magic recovery potion. Michael praises his son's judgment, but Julius looks away with a troubled expression, feeling the weight of the moment. Standing quietly in the background, Tesua watches the powerful Duke with a mixture of awe and nervous apprehension. A look of deep sorrow crosses the doctor's face as he prepares to deliver a truly devastating medical diagnosis. Shock freezes Michael's heart as the doctor confirms that Elizabeth is suffering from the fatal and incurable Necrea disease. Michael closes his eyes in a moment of heavy silence, the light reflecting off his face as he processes tragedy. The doctor warns that the potion was only a temporary fix and cannot be used frequently on an infant. With a cold and stern expression, Michael commands that this fatal diagnosis must remain a strictly guarded family secret. Michael's green eyes burn with an intense light as he demands a more detailed explanation from the young Tesua. Stammering in the face of the Duke's formidable presence, Tesua manages a quiet, terrified thanks as he bows low. From a high perspective, Elizabeth looks tiny and fragile as she sleeps alone in her massive, ornate palace crib. The baby lies perfectly still under her covers, a lone bead of sweat showing her body's ongoing magical struggle. Dizziness and nausea overwhelm her as a trembling hand reaches out through an oppressive, dark haze. Surrounded by massive stacks of paperwork, the weary blue-haired woman struggles to stay focused at her desk. She desperately tries to finish her tasks before the arrogant nobles can burden her with even more work. An aggressive man in a white uniform points a finger, demanding that she hurry up and stop slacking. With a cruel smirk, another dark-haired man mocks the commoner, asserting that she should simply obey the nobility. Her hand trembles violently against the dark surface of the desk as her physical limits are finally reached. Determined not to lose to her tormentors, the blue-haired woman hunches over, desperately clutching her books and documents. Her strength fails, and her hand slips from the documents with a soft, sliding sound. Suru, a heavy thud, dosa, sounds as she collapses onto the floor, scattering official papers all around her. Panic sets in as her body refuses to move, her face covered in pained sweat during the terrifying collapse. Reaching out with a final, desperate gesture, she cries out from the floor as her consciousness begins to fade. Elizabeth's eyes snap open, the baby looking up with a dazed expression as she slowly wakes in her crib. Duke Michael reassures his daughter while holding a glowing pink gem, its soft light bathing the room in warmth. With a gaze full of resolve and sorrow, Michael swears a solemn oath to save Elizabeth from her affliction. The scene shifts to a lavish spread of tea and cakes, where the name Lady Tisua is spoken. Julius asks Michael about research into the Nacria disease, while the brown-haired boy sits quietly on the sofa. Michael expresses his deep gratitude to Tisua, acknowledging that the boy's knowledge was instrumental in saving Elizabeth's life. A close-up of Duke Michael reveals his stern, handsome features as he reflects on the gravity of the situation. Julius looks on with a soft, thoughtful expression, his golden eyes filled with quiet relief for his sister. Sipping his tea, Julius remains shocked that Tisua possessed the secret method to suppress dangerous magic depletion. The brown-haired boy explains that a magic stone can slow the depletion, though his expression remains heavy and serious. Julius and Michael discuss the miraculous timing of finding a magic stone perfectly compatible with baby Elizabeth. Julius asks his father about the availability of more stones, while Michael remains deep in silent, somber thought. Michael places a hand on an ornate wooden chest, commanding that it be brought forward for the children. The box is set down with a thud, and as it clicks open, Paka. Everyone leans in. Julius and Tisua lean forward in utter disbelief, sweat beads forming as they peer into the mysterious wooden chest. The box is filled to the brim with glowing pink magic stones, radiating an intense and beautiful magical energy. Stunned by the treasure, Julius asks where such a hoard was obtained, while Tisua clutches his head in shock. Michael explains that the king granted him a portion of these rare crystals when they were first discovered. A single, radiant pink stone rests on the pillow beside Elizabeth as she watches it with curious, wide eyes. The magic stone pulses with light, creating a swirling aura of pink energy that gently envelops the resting baby. Elizabeth's tiny reflection appears in the facets of the glowing crystal, highlighting the deep connection between her and the magic. Transitioning back to the past, the blue-haired woman continues her exhaustive search through books for a cure. Back in the present, Elizabeth sleeps peacefully under the protective, soft glow of the nearby magic stone. Suddenly, Elizabeth's eyes pop open with a startled exclamation. "Ah!" Her attention captured by a sound at the door. A bright light spills into the room as the nursery doors are thrown open, surprising the tiny, alert baby. Duke Michael stands tall in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the brilliant morning light as he enters. Elizabeth babbles a cheerful greeting to her father, waving her tiny arms as he approaches her golden crib. The baby lets out a happy sound, Ugia, while grasping at Michael's hand, delighted by his comforting presence. A brown-haired maid asks Michael for permission to leave the magic stone in the nursery for the baby's safety. Michael instructs the maid to place the stone directly against Elizabeth's skin if her magic depletion symptoms ever return. Elizabeth smiles brightly, thinking about the many questions she wishes she could ask her older brother, Julius. Michael looks away with a pained expression, noting the tragic lack of medical specialists within the entire kingdom. Father and daughter share a tender moment of silence, Elizabeth's sparkling eyes full of love for the tall duke. The doors burst open with a loud bang, baton, as a woman in a pink dress forces her way in. Ignoring the frantic servant, the blue-haired woman bursts into the room and commands silence with fierce authority. With a determined look in her golden eyes, the blue-haired woman declares her right as a member of the Waltzer family. Elizabeth watches from her crib as the newcomer confronts Michael, the atmosphere in the nursery turning suddenly tense. A sudden, sharp realization strikes Juan as the woman stares down at the baby in the crib. Overwhelmed by emotion, the blue-haired woman covers her mouth and trembles while gazing down at her tiny daughter. Michael holds the blue-haired woman close, their expressions somber as they stand in a lavishly decorated room. Michael, the woman, and Julius depart, while a maid bowing at the door acknowledges his orders with a quiet, understood. Tiny Elizabeth sleeps soundly in her crib, unaware of the heavy atmosphere permeating the palace. The baby's eyes snap open as she reels from a terrifying dream, thinking about how frightening the experience was. Standing outside the nursery, the blue-haired woman covers her face in grief, while Michael remains by her side. Distraught, the woman cries out that she doesn't care about her own fate, only focusing on her daughter. Michael urges her to calm down, warning that her emotional state could trigger another one of her own attacks. With a grim expression, Michael reminds her of his duties as Prime Minister and the importance of their upcoming meeting. Tears stream down the woman's face as she admits her inability to accept the cruel reality facing Elizabeth. Narrative text highlights the extreme rarity of Necria disease as Elizabeth lies fragile and sweating in her sleep. The mother's golden eyes overflow with tears as she laments that her daughter must suffer from this curse too. A flashback reveals the mother's past as a talented, lavender-haired beauty who caught the royal family's attention. Her promising future was shattered the day before her social debut when she suddenly contracted the fatal Necria disease. She slowly inched toward death until a magic stone miraculously saved her, though she remained permanently weakened. Silhouette figures mock her as she is cast out from her noble life after losing her innate magical powers. She recalls the deep resentment she felt toward the arrogant nobles who valued magic over all other human traits. In her darkest hour, a young Michael in military uniform appeared before her, reaching out a helping hand. Michael, then a rising knight, asked to buy her abilities, showing he valued her talent over her lack of magic. She reflects on starting a family with him despite her illness, shown in a portrait with Michael and young Julius. A glowing illustration depicts the woman on her wedding day, smiling brightly while holding a beautiful bouquet of flowers. Returning to the present, Michael supports his weeping wife as they grapple with the news of Elizabeth's condition. Stricken with guilt, the blue-haired woman looks up and asks Michael if the baby's illness is her fault. Michael gazes at her with deep concern, reassuring her that Necria disease is not always a hereditary condition. He places his hands on her shoulders, offering steadying support as they stand together in the grand hallway. Michael vows that he will find a way to save Elizabeth, a promise that slightly eases the mother's despair. Elizabeth gazes at the magic stone in her crib, while the narration explains the kingdom's hierarchy based on magic. Panels show the couple's political power. The mother became chancellor thanks to the backing of the influential Walzer family. The text explains that information regarding Necria is strictly suppressed to protect the reputation of affected noble families. Maids move quickly through the nursery as Elizabeth watches the daily routine from her golden crib. A brown-haired maid approaches the crib, noting the reduced number of servants currently working within the Walzer household. The maid offers a sincere apology as she prepares to change the magic stone, helping to stabilize the baby. Elizabeth watches with wide eyes as the maid places a glowing purple crystal into her small, reaching hand. Bowing low, the maid promises to be more careful from now on to avoid any further trouble. Elizabeth grumbles internally about the extreme inconvenience of her infant body, her face twisted in a cute scowl. Michael and Julius visit the nursery, bringing gifts and a pink stuffed rabbit to cheer up the recovering baby. Elizabeth flails her tiny arms and legs, desperately thinking that she isn't ready to give up on life yet. Julius enters with Tesua, who carries a heavy doctor's bag, both boys looking serious about their mission. Julius informs the curious Elizabeth that Tesua has been diligently researching possible treatments for her rare magical affliction. Julius reviews the data Tesua collected, noting it matches the information previously provided to their father, Lord Walzer. Elizabeth observes them while the narration warns that simply replenishing magic is merely a temporary solution for her disease. Julius turns to Tesua, urgently asking what must be done to find a permanent, fundamental cure for Elizabeth. Standing tall, the young Tesua explains that his own interest in the disease led him to begin independent research. From her crib, Elizabeth is shocked to see her young brother Julius actually reading and understanding complex medical documents. Determined to show she is feeling better, Elizabeth sits up and lets out a loud, babyish exclamation. "Uda!" Julius and Tesua are startled as Elizabeth waves her arms energetically, the room filling with a more hopeful energy. Julius is delighted by her spirit, though Elizabeth continues to find her physical limitations as an infant incredibly frustrating. The scene shifts to a dark room, where a blonde woman in an elegant navy dress sits alone. The blonde woman reads a report, calmly acknowledging that the daughter of the Walzer family has fallen ill. A dark, shadowy figure stands behind the blonde woman as she continues her quiet observation of the situation. Snapping her fan shut with a sharp motion, the woman coldly notes that an infant with Necria has no hope. Hands present a crafted wooden tray containing various square tiles engraved with unique, mysterious ancient symbols. Julius introduces a letterboard to Elizabeth, explaining it will serve as their vital new way to communicate. Julius blushes with a soft smile, clearly touched and relieved that Elizabeth understands his special gift for her. Julius stands beside the golden crib as Elizabeth examines her new board, both sharing a moment of quiet connection. Julius looks over at Tesua as they continue their serious discussion while Elizabeth listens intently from her crib. Julius and Elizabeth share a warm, close-up look together as the conversation shifts toward their young guest. A maid stands by the ornate nursery doors, announcing that Julius's friend has arrived to see him. Tesua bursts through the double doors with a look of intense urgency, calling out for Julius as he enters. In a lavishly lit room, Duke Michael sits across from a guest who notes their son's growing association. The brown-haired man smiles broadly while discussing his family's special products, maintaining a polite and diplomatic tone. Michael's expression turns cold and stern as he brings up the sensitive topic of the mysterious Necria disease. The brown-haired man falls silent, looking down as he acknowledges the harsh reality that no cure currently exists. Michael questions the man, noting the Lars family's legendary reputation for being able to cure any magical ailment. Michael's eyes glow with an intimidating blue light, causing the man to sweat under the pressure of his gaze. The man sighs and leans back, admitting that the condition might not actually be an illness at all. Back in the nursery, Julius and Tesua sit together with the baby, discussing the heavy secrets they've uncovered. Tesua stands up with sudden intensity, declaring he has finally realized why research on the disease was suspended. Julius and Elizabeth watch with expressions of pure shock as Tesua reveals the condition was never a disease. Dark, thorny imagery fills the room as Tesua explains his horrifying theory that the affliction is actually a curse. Julius listens in disbelief as Tesua explains that his family backed away from the research due to its danger. Flashbacks show Tesua discovering an ancient family journal, revealing that the royal family took over the secret research. Julius stares ahead with a pale, shocked expression as the gravity of the royal family's involvement sinks in. Elizabeth recalls her past life, remembering a specific report on the Nicria disease she once saw in a library. A close-up of an old book illustrates Elizabeth's terrifying realization that she might truly be a victim of sorcery. Swirling blue energy gathers in Elizabeth's hands as she wonders who could have cast such a sinister, ancient curse. Julius rushes to Elizabeth's side, his face filled with panic as he notices the magic stone glowing in her hands. Julius urgently asks about the magic stone as Elizabeth stares at the blue aura pulsating between her tiny palms. A trail of blue mana flows outward from Elizabeth, snaking through the room as her magical power begins draining. Elizabeth reaches out her tiny arms, desperately begging her big brother to hold her and offer some comfort. Julius and Tesua watch Elizabeth with deep concern, wondering if her sudden restlessness is caused by hidden anxiety. Julius points toward the large nursery window, suggesting they go look outside to help the baby calm down. Julius carries Elizabeth toward the grand window, while she remains lost in her own deep, complex internal thoughts. Elizabeth stares out the window with a look of realization, identifying the royal palace standing in the distance. Julius holds Elizabeth and her letterboard, his gentle expression hiding the growing tension within the Walzer household. Julius reacts with shock when Elizabeth indicates a need to go somewhere, questioning why she must leave. Elizabeth reflects on her rare ability to see the flow of magic, making her the only one capable of investigating. Julius watches his sister with a heavy gaze, his mind filled with the dangerous implications of her requested journey. Julius erupts with a fierce, crackling lightning aura, shouting that he will absolutely not allow her to go. Flashback panels show Michael reflecting on the royal family's long history of suppressing research into the clear disease. Michael considers the chilling possibility that someone within the kingdom is responsible for the curse on his family. Imagery of Michael's wife and child highlights the personal tragedy and suffering caused by the kingdom's dark secrets. Kneeling noble women represent the many families throughout the past who have suffered from this incurable magical affliction. Michael realizes with grim clarity that the royal family intentionally ignored the research to protect their own interests. Michael stands before a backdrop of roaring flames, his resolve hardening into a cold, terrifying desire for vengeance. Michael vows to burn the entire country to ashes if the royal family is responsible for his daughter's pain. The scene returns to the quiet, moonlit nursery where Julius stands watch by the window in deep thought. Elizabeth is stunned by her brother's intense opposition, knowing that another magical seizure could end her life. Blue mana swirls around Elizabeth
as she explains the rarity of her gift and the necessity of her mission.
Rain pours over the towers of the royal palace, emphasizing the cold and dangerous path that lies ahead.
Elizabeth lets out a weary sigh while Julius watches her, both weighed down by the burden of their secrets.
Julius glares with intense determination, his face framed by a sharp, glowing aura as he firmly refuses.
Elizabeth remains resolute, though Julius questions how an infant expects to infiltrate the heavily guarded royal palace. Michael stands tall amidst his knights, his arms crossed as he declares the proposed plan completely impossible. Elizabeth ignores the warnings, planning to use magic and brute force, while Julius calls out in alarm.
Julius hoists the flailing Elizabeth into the air as she lets out a loud, babyish battle cry. A burst of pink and white magic erupts from Elizabeth's tiny hands, demanding that her brother let go.
Amidst a misty rain, a blue-haired youth holds baby Elizabeth while facing a concerned and rain-drenched Julius. The blue-haired youth looks desperate, vowing to fight against a fate of certain death and seeking salvation. Julius watches a fading silhouette before looking up with a somber expression as the vision or spirit departs.
The blue-haired youth cradles the baby, her eyes burning with a fierce resolve to survive until the end. In the nursery, the blue-haired youth and Julius stand together, acknowledging their shared identity as Waltzer family members. Julius looks forward with a confident smirk, vowing not to be outdone by his brother's spirit and drive. Armed guards in blue uniforms stand at attention beneath the grand stone arches of the palace entrance. A figure in a decorative robe commands the group to stop while approaching two mysterious hooded individuals. The guards bow respectfully as the duo presents golden medals, granting them immediate passage into the royal grounds. Walking through the palace, the blue-haired youth regrets not using their high-ranking influence and special passes much sooner. Night falls over the majestic palace towers while they discuss the first queen's significant influence over the court. Julius notes their status as a duke's children, emphasizing the necessity of having a proper escort for safety. The pair ascends the grand palace stairs, recalling an invitation from the first queen that had been delayed. Flashbacks show Michael's military duties as knight captain, a role that keeps him busy away from the palace. Julius suspects the first queen's interference was relayed to their father through their mother's high-ranking political position. Julius remains adamant about his stance, while the blue-haired youth nods in agreement, carrying a small satchel. A faint trail of blue manna guides the pair through a bustling hallway filled with maids and officials. Michael, seen from behind, engages in a serious conversation with a dark-haired official in a white cloak. Julius and the blue-haired youth break into a nervous sweat, suddenly spotting Michael standing just ahead of them. Michael's sharp gaze shifts toward them, his stern expression making the air feel heavy with immediate, looming danger. Hiding nearby, the blue-haired youth focuses on a glowing purple book, her expression filled with sudden, sharp realization. Disguised as a civil official, the blue-haired youth approaches the guard to inquire about the mysterious medical documents. Touching the book triggers a powerful magical reaction, sending a jolt of energy through the blue-haired youth's eyes. A horrifying vision of blood and fire fills the youth's mind, showing bodies strewn across a burning hall. The youth witnesses a past tragedy where people flee in terror from a massive, roaring inferno consuming everything. The vision reveals Michael with glowing gold eyes, ordering everyone to die, leaving the youth reeling in shock. Stumbling back, the blue-haired youth looks nauseous, while Julius stares in confusion at his sister's sudden distress. Fear takes hold as the blue-haired youth realizes the deadly consequences if their father discovers their secret presence. The youth trembles with anxiety, hands clasped tightly,
while Julius looks on with growing worry for his sibling. Standing in the ornate corridor, the youth contemplates a fate even more terrifying than the deadly Necria disease. Julius asks what is wrong, but the youth quickly dismisses the concern and urges him to keep moving. They walk down the long, patterned carpet, the youth worrying that their suspicious behavior will soon be noticed. A trail of mana flows from the youth's waist as they approach a grand gala filled with noble women. The pair sneaks past a lavish banquet table, watching the elite guests socialize and drink from crystal glasses. A stunning blonde woman in a red gown stands elegantly among her ladies-in-waiting, radiating power and grace. From their hiding spot, the duo observes the queen consort, desperately searching for the magical medium behind the curse. A close-up shows a noblewoman's hand holding a bright red, intricately carved fan against her chest. Groups of noblemen and women gather under the palace chandeliers, unaware of the two children watching them. Michael, wearing a blue military uniform, stands before a blonde woman draped in a flowing red cape. The perspective shifts high above the hall as Michael and the mysterious woman walk together through the palace. The woman praises Michael's legendary vigilance, but he coldly maintains that there are no current security issues. The blonde woman looks on with a calm, unreadable expression as she continues her walk with the Duke. Michael speaks dismissively about being a doctor, his cold gaze fixed on the woman as they discuss health. Looking her directly in the eye, Michael questions the Majesty's awareness of the dark secrets surrounding the kingdom. Arthur Fia Eltode, a blonde-haired man in royal attire, vows to devote himself completely to his mission. King Arthur is known as a benevolent leader, earning immense popularity among the commoners despite his cold-hearted reputation. Possessing great charisma, the king supports a merit-based policy, ensuring talented individuals are appointed regardless of their social status. An ornate portrait captures King Arthur alongside a dark-haired woman, radiating a sense of royal grace and affection. Michael approaches King Arthur with an urgent request for an investigation, to which the king immediately and firmly agrees. While discussing the rare victims of the disease, Michael watches from the shadows with a sharp, calculating gaze. The dark-haired queen dismisses the need for immediate action, expressing her desire to see her beloved king instead. Arthur looks upon the queen with intense devotion, while Michael watches silently as the king calls her his rose. A sudden, sharp crack sounds as Michael clenches his fist in a silent display of mounting fury and resolve. Amidst a lavish gala, the blue-haired youth, disguised as Elizabeth, watches the noblewomen socialize while hiding her true intent. Hiding beneath a table, the blue-haired youth observes the mana flow, while Julius remains nearby, vigilant of any discovery. An oppressive purple aura erupts from Michael as his golden eyes glow with a terrifying and cold, murderous intent. The air grows cold as a glass suddenly cracks, prompting the blue-haired youth to wonder if her father is angry. Julius urgently warns the youth that they will be found out if they don't remain careful during the commotion. Michael's power flares as a vision of death appears, causing a sudden, frantic commotion among the startled palace guests. Confusion spreads through the grand hall, while King Arthur and the Queen stand amidst the growing crowd of worried nobles. Michael stands bathed in a sinister purple light, his golden eyes fixed on his targets with a frightening intensity. Purple lightning crackles around Michael's fist as he declares that it is finally time for his long-awaited vengeance. Blood spatters across the floor as the youth is suddenly struck, catching Michael off guard as he looks on. More blood spatters the tiles while the blue-haired youth stumbles, her disguise failing as she suffers a grievous wound. A spectral vision of Elizabeth's true self appears behind the youth, her eyes wide with shock and sudden realization. Michael looks down with a cold, unyielding expression, his presence dominating the room as the palace falls into silence.
Blood drips from the youth's mouth as Michael's stern mask finally cracks into an expression of pure, unbridled horror. A dull thud echoes as Michael catches the falling, bloodied youth, his hands trembling as he holds his child. King Arthur demands everyone step back as he shields the queen, questioning if an assassination attempt is currently underway. Bleeding and weak, the youth gazes up at Michael while he cradles her, his face a mask of desperation. Elizabeth feels a wave of relief as she notices the murderous aura fading, seeing her father return to normal.
Julius watches the scene from afar, his heart sinking as Elizabeth's name echoes through his mind in the chaos.
A high-pitched scream pierces the air as a noblewoman witnesses the blood and the terrifying scene unfolding before her.
The blonde woman in the red dress looks on with a troubled, suspicious expression as the chaos deepens. Julius realizes that he must act immediately, his eyes widening with the wake of the moment and the stakes.
Leaping into action, Julius launches a brilliant green magic projectile toward the fan held by the blonde woman. A loud clatter sounds as the fan is knocked to the floor, drawing the attention of everyone in the hall. Julius realizes the curse will end if the medium is destroyed, watching as the fan shatters under his magic. Sinister black smoke billows from the blonde woman in red, engulfing her as she clutches her head in pain. The blonde woman lets out a piercing shriek as her hair turns white, the curse rebounding violently onto its caster. Michael looks toward the source of the scream, while someone nearby shouts in triumph as the spell is broken. The king and queen watch in stunned silence as the crowd parts, revealing the fallen woman in the red dress. Weakly pointing, Elizabeth identifies the woman on the floor as the one responsible for casting the deadly ancient curse. Julius looks on with a mixture of fear and determination, ready to face the consequences of their bold infiltration. Michael issues a stern command to keep the woman under close watch while he continues to hold his daughter. Julius supports the injured Elizabeth as they acknowledge their father's orders, their bodies trembling from the intense magical strain. Michael turns his back and walks away, leaving his children to recover on the floor of the silent ballroom. Standing alone in the middle of the palace, Michael is silhouetted against the light, his thoughts heavy with secrets. Michael looks back at his children with a pained, unreadable expression before closing his eyes to the harsh reality. Julius cradles the unconscious Elizabeth in his arms, his voice a soft, desperate whisper as he calls for their father. Guards in white capes surround the fallen woman in red, who remains defeated and broken on the palace floor. The woman screams in frantic denial, her voice echoing through the hall as she tries to escape her fate. A close-up reveals the woman's face twisted in absolute terror, her eyes wide as she realizes her plan has failed. Michael stands tall and imposing over the woman, his cold gaze offering no mercy for the one who harmed Elizabeth. Queen Claudia looks down with a heavy heart, deeply disappointed that someone she once trusted used deadly curses. The queen and Michael walk away from the defeated white-haired woman, whose treacherous plan has finally been exposed. A blinding light erupts from the woman's chest as she lets out a final, pained cry and collapses to the floor. Michael kneels beside the unconscious traitor, checking her pulse with a cold and unyielding expression to ensure she is neutralized. While Claudia observes from behind her fan, Michael and the guards use a magical constraint to securely bind the woman.
A formal portrait shows Queen Claudia, who is widely celebrated in high society as a truly merciful and gracious leader. Julius reflects on how Michael nearly went berserk during the gala, even though the surrounding noble guests noticed very little. Michael walks through the palace corridors alone, his mind burdened by the secrets uncovered and the safety of his family. Back at the estate, Julius and a maid stand over Elizabeth's ornate golden cradle, watching the baby finally rest. Julius lets out a long, shaky breath of relief, thankful that Elizabeth is safe and the terrifying ordeal is over. Julius frets over explaining their palace infiltration to Michael, imagining his father's inevitable fury once he returns home. Michael moves through the palace with cold efficiency, finalizing the cleanup of the night's events before heading home himself. The maid smiles warmly at the sleeping baby Elizabeth, while Julius continues to worry about the coming confrontation with Michael. A heavy, echoing thud sounds as Michael returns home, his imposing and glowing blue aura immediately filling the entire room. Michael's golden eyes glow with an intense, terrifying light as he demands an explanation for his children's recent reckless behavior. 3 days after the incident, the white-haired woman remains broken and defeated, her sinister ambitions permanently crushed. Michael arrives home after finishing his business at the royal palace, radiating a heavy, oppressive energy that puts everyone on edge. Michael demands an excuse for their behavior, causing both Julius and the baby Elizabeth to scream in comical terror. Wah! Julius nervously begins his explanation, his face pale as he tries to find the right words to appease his father. Rain falls over the royal palace as the narrative explains how Elizabeth's leaking magic was tracked through the night. Julius explains that he sensed the magic while at the palace, his own hidden powers awakening in a moment of crisis. Julius reveals how he focused his energy to sense the mana, desperate to find Elizabeth and stop their father's rampage. Elizabeth tries to look innocent, while Julius maintains he isn't lying, both of them sweating under Michael's intense, judging gaze. Michael stands tall in the center of the room, questioning the truth of Julius's claims with a sharp, skeptical look. Michael's eyes glow with suspicion as he demands to know if Julius is really telling the truth about his powers. Julius frantically insists he is being honest, while the baby Elizabeth whimpers, feeling the weight of their father's heavy scrutiny. Chibi bubbles show the maid misinterpreting Elizabeth's earlier crying as a simple wet diaper, unaware of the actual magical danger. The family stands together in the room as the initial tension begins to settle into a more manageable, albeit awkward. Michael asks if the insignias were successfully recovered, and Julius confirms they are safely stored away in his own room. Julius hesitates for a moment, stumbling over his words as he prepares to ask his father a very serious question. Michael listens with a calm but stern expression, his posture as a high-ranking military official remaining perfectly composed and imposing. Elizabeth watches intently as Michael explains that the magical documents had special processing to track anyone who dared touch them. Julius is stunned to learn that Michael already knew the identities of everyone at the party through his vigilant security. Michael issues a final warning to be careful, his sharp gaze reminding Julius of the weight of their family's secrets. A wide view shows the palace ballroom, while Michael explains how his mastery of security allowed him to oversee everything. Julius is filled with sudden, sparkling admiration for Michael's incredible foresight, seeing his father in a whole new light. Julius exclaims his praise for Michael, his eyes wide with awe at the Duke's legendary and unmatched tactical brilliance. Elizabeth is utterly speechless, realizing her father's intellect exceeds her own past life capabilities as she sweats in the maid's arms.
Elizabeth is further bewildered when she realizes that Julius is now planning to start imitating their father's stern mannerisms. Michael looks down with a faint, unreadable expression, his earlier anger finally beginning to fade into a quiet, cold calm. Michael approaches the maid and baby, his steady and heavy footsteps tapping softly against the floor as he reaches out. Elizabeth smiles with pure, unbridled joy as Michael gently strokes her head, his touch warm and unexpectedly tender. Michael lifts Elizabeth into his arms and pets her head, his stern face softening as he cradles his youngest child. Michael confirms that Elizabeth has finally recovered, his gentle touch on her head bringing a happy flush to her cheeks. Elizabeth laughs joyfully while being held, feeling completely safe and cherished within her father's strong and protective embrace. Julius asks if Elizabeth will fall ill again, his voice filled with a brother's genuine worry for her well-being. Michael explains that necria is a curse and cannot be cast repeatedly, assuring his children that the danger is gone. Julius and Elizabeth share a comical moment of relief, sweating as they finally relax after the long and terrifying interrogation. Michael looks upon his children with a rare, faint smile, his pride in their survival and loyalty shining through. Michael reassures the family that Elizabeth is stable now, his firm gaze finally bringing a true sense of peace home. Julius reports securing goods from the Kingdom of Beyond while Elizabeth watches from a small chibi bubble. Michael reflects on the blue-haired Adelina taking over diplomatic duties after a traumatic incident, his expression turning cold. Elizabeth and Julius are shocked to learn that the first queen consort, Adelina, handled the diplomatic negotiations herself. Elizabeth comically criticizes Michael's harsh language, while Julius relates to the exhausting struggle of the post-incident palace cleanup. A close-up of Elizabeth shows her looking up thoughtfully as she considers her father's and Adelina's difficult situation. Elizabeth wonders if Adelina is actually a good person, before her thoughts turn dark and she shudders in denial. Michael and Julius comically ask if Elizabeth needs a diaper change, much to the baby's indignant and vocal annoyance. The scene shifts to a warm, bubbly bath where Michael cradles Elizabeth alongside Julius amidst shimmering steam. Michael sternly reminds Julius to keep up with his magic regulation while they enjoy their peaceful family bath time. Julius looks thoughtful as he focuses on his magic, reflecting on his sister's concerns about their upcoming school separation. Elizabeth laughs joyfully in the bath, feeling reassured and safe by her father's direct and comforting words. Julius asks if Michael will watch over Elizabeth while he returns to the academy, seeking his father's firm promise. Elizabeth screams in terror at the thought of the awkward atmosphere returning once Julius leaves for school again. Elizabeth reflects on her name and miraculous growth after the curse, as maids watch over her with tearful relief. A large text bubble emphasizes Elizabeth's rapid growth as she stands tall and energetic, much to the maid's surprise. Elizabeth crawls across the palace floor, narrating how the excessive mana buildup has finally stopped, leaving her perfectly healthy. Bam! Elizabeth strikes a proud and adorable pose on the floor, basking in her newfound health and sparkling energy. Michael holds Elizabeth up in the grand hall, looking slightly confused by his daughter's sudden and energetic behavior. A series of panels shows Elizabeth getting dressed and boarding a carriage as she prepares to depart the palace. Michael sits majestically while holding the impeccably dressed Elizabeth, both radiating an aura of high society power and elegance. A speech bubble confirms Elizabeth will be living at the royal palace for a while as the carriage waits. Elizabeth looks out the carriage window with a disgruntled expression, her thoughts crackling with a sense of impending boredom. The carriage rattles along as Elizabeth napping inside, while a maid and Michael keep watch over her during travel. Elizabeth imagines Julius happily befriending his subordinates at the academy, hoping he is finding success and joy there.
Elizabeth frets over the potential awkwardness of meeting Adelina again, worried the woman won't even recognize her.
Michael sits in the carriage beside Elizabeth, who is perched in a small basket, looking out at the scenery. Elizabeth asks a question in baby talk, while Michael looks at her with a gentle, patient expression, promising future understanding. The ornate royal carriage passes through the palace gates, signaling the family's arrival at their temporary new home. Adelina stands with her arms crossed in a study, her expressions stoic and distant as she waits for Michael. Michael tells Adelina not to get worked up, while she protests his sudden decision to bring Elizabeth to her. Michael assures Adelina that Elizabeth is growing every day, while the baby crawls happily across the study floor. Michael and Adelina continue their conversation while Elizabeth plays near a maid in the background of the large office. A close-up of Adelina reveals her sharp, golden eyes as she mentions needing the king's action regarding Nakria. Michael looks at Adelina with a calm, unreadable gaze before turning to leave the room with a firm step. Michael departs, leaving Adelina alone in her study with Elizabeth and the maid as the heavy doors close. Adelina sits at her desk, buried in paperwork, while Elizabeth watches her from the floor, holding a pink bottle. Adelina focuses intently on her documents, her face looking pale as Elizabeth observes the blue-haired woman's exhausting workload. Elizabeth realizes Adelina keeps very few attendants around her, a stark contrast to the noble life she once knew. Elizabeth senses manna coming from the documents on the desk as a sudden knock-knock sounds at the door. A brown-haired official enters the room with a stack of papers and a suspicious, sweat-inducing smile on her face. The official is surprised to see a baby in the study, her eyes widening as she spots Elizabeth. Adelina coldly orders the official to leave the papers, while the woman insists her superior required immediate delivery. Adelina recognized the brown-haired woman as a new hire from last month, her expression remaining guarded and analytical. The official is visibly shaken when Adelina correctly identifies her, sweating under the blue-haired woman's sharp and knowing gaze. A close-up shows Adelina's calm but piercing eyes as she observes the official's flustered and suspicious reaction. The official lets out a panicked shout and flees the room while the maid and Elizabeth watch in bewilderment. A loud sorry echoes as the official slams the door shut, leaving the room in a state of silence. Elizabeth is impressed by Adelina's incredible memory, noting how it might even surpass her father's legendary tactical intellect. Adelina returns to her work with a calm expression, and Elizabeth reflects on the woman's surprisingly fair nature. The narrative explains Adelina's system of hiring talented commoners, showing her commitment to meritocracy regardless of social status. Silence fills the study while Adelina works diligently at her desk, as Elizabeth and the maid watch nearby. Elizabeth notices a stray document floating away and landing on the floor with a soft, quiet thud. The purple-haired baby crawls toward the fallen paper, while the brown-haired maid watches her with curious concern. Elizabeth stares intently at the document, her green eyes wide with focus as she analyzes the complex writing. Elizabeth slaps the paper while exclaiming that a section is wrong, startling the maid in the background. Adelina coldly orders the maid to stop the baby, prompting the flustered servant to offer a deep apology. The maid quickly scoops Elizabeth up, noticing the baby has comically gotten ink all over her tiny hands. Adelina carefully reviews the document Elizabeth pointed out and is stunned to realize a specific number is incorrect. The maid excitedly asks if Elizabeth is a genius, but Adelina remains skeptical, calling it a mere coincidence. Adelina stares at Elizabeth with sharp, golden eyes, wondering if the Duke's meticulous nature has truly been inherited. Amidst a flurry of sparkles, the maid holds Elizabeth high and declares that the young lady is a genius.
Adelina reflects on how talented individuals are valuable resources while watching the maid carry the cheerful baby away. Adelina returns to her exhausting paperwork while sipping tea, maintaining her composed and elegant posture in the study.
Elizabeth reflects on Adelina's future as a notorious woman, finding it hard to believe while watching her work. Elizabeth wonders if Adelina is simply misunderstood, her thoughts filled with a sense of strange and lingering curiosity.
A sudden, sharp knock-knock precedes Michael's arrival, and Adelina assumes he has come to retrieve his daughter.
Michael carries Elizabeth while informing Adelina that he is not there for a pickup, surprising both women. Michael presents an invitation from the second queen consort for a tea party, addressed to Adelina and Elizabeth. Adelina cites her poor health as a reason for hesitation, while Michael looks at her with a knowing gaze. Michael decides that he will attend the tea party alongside Elizabeth instead, leaving the room in stunned silence. Elizabeth, Adelina, and the maid all freeze with comically shocked expressions at Michael's unexpected and bold social move. A loud, panicked shout of disbelief echoes through the palace, highlighting the gravity of Michael's social decision. The narrative explains the high-stakes nature of noble tea parties, where the hostess and guests hold significant power. These social gatherings serve as vital hubs for exchanging information on trendy dresses, rare teas, and delicate sweets. Noblewomen use these parties as tactical battlegrounds to determine which influential families currently hold the most political sway. Gaining a social advantage depends entirely on forming strong connections, often through intense and competitive noble networking. Elizabeth stands before the Grand Palace, mentally preparing herself for her debut into the cutthroat world of noble society. Elizabeth sits with a determined expression, ready to face the ladies' tea party, despite her status as a baby. Elizabeth reflects on the absurdity of attending a high society party while being dressed by her diligent personal attendants. Two servants are officially introduced as Elizabeth's attendants, with Sarah standing confidently beside the plain servant Sophie. Elizabeth recalls Sarah's bravery, remembering how she feared the Duke but still dared to speak her mind. Elizabeth reflects on Sophie's intense loyalty, remembering how the maid once vowed to protect her with her life. Elizabeth realizes Michael assigned attendants because Adelina is comically inept at caring for babies, much to her annoyance. Elizabeth feels a sense of dread about approaching the first queen, reflecting on the woman's history and reputation. Watching her father get dressed, Elizabeth wonders if Michael lacks allies just like her brother in his past life. Elizabeth strikes a proud pose, determined to expand her family's social connections during her first major public appearance. The scene shifts to a radiant, sunlit ballroom, where noblewomen in elegant gowns gather for the day's event. Attendees gossip about Adelina falling ill and the first queen stepping in to handle the recent diplomatic negotiations. A group of noblewomen surrounds the first queen, praising her as the true center of the kingdom's social world. The first queen, a blonde woman in a stunning purple gown, smiles warmly at her circle of devoted admirers. The queen gracefully remarks that every citizen of the kingdom is a beloved and precious individual in her eyes. A noblewoman praises the queen's mercy while mentioning how terrifying Duke Walzer appeared at the recent evening party. The crowd whispers in hushed tones, pitying Adelina for having such a rough and violent husband as the Duke. Michael stands majestically in the doorway, his red military cape and gold medals radiating a truly imposing aura. Michael's lips curl slightly as he announces their arrival, confirming they were invited by the first queen herself. Michael holds up a cheerful, waving Elizabeth, officially introducing his young daughter to the shocked and whispering crowd. The noblewomen gasp in surprise as they notice Michael and Elizabeth are wearing perfectly coordinated red and gold outfits.
Michael holds Elizabeth close in a rare moment of fatherly affection, looking adorable despite his usual stern military demeanor.
Michael enters the party with his cold, red-haired gaze, ignoring the stares as Elizabeth remains safe in his arms.
The first queen and her guests sit at the tea table, their eyes fixed on Michael as he approaches. Michael holds Elizabeth at the sunlit garden tea party, politely thanking the hostess for the formal invitation. Michael justifies his attendance by highlighting a loophole in the invitation that allowed a representative of equal rank.
The purple-haired baby waves adorably at the guests, instantly charming several noblewomen with her bright and cheerful energy.
Michael gazes down at Elizabeth with a rare, gentle expression while continuing to hold her securely in his arms. Elizabeth thinks to herself that infiltrating the social event was surprisingly easy as she clings to her stoic father. A small hand points toward a bouquet on the table, and Elizabeth asks her father to pick a flower. Michael observes a guest, while Elizabeth reaches out with a yellow rose, letting out a happy, tiny eye. A dark-haired looks startled as Michael's hand enters the frame, offering her the bright yellow flower. The woman blushes furiously while holding the rose, and the other guests whisper excitedly about the baby's bold move. A blonde woman in purple watches the social interaction with a cold, sidelong glance as another attendee trembles nervously. A noblewoman lets out a panicked "Kya" as she trips, her light purple gown fluttering as she loses balance. Michael effortlessly catches the falling woman, keeping her steady while still cradling the purple-haired baby in his arm. Elizabeth looks up at the blushing noblewoman and cutely asks if she is okay with a soft "ooh." Nearby noblewomen gossip behind their fans, judging the unseemly display of physical contact in the presence of the queen. Undeterred by the judgment, the baby cheers with her arms raised, clearly enjoying her time as the center of attention. The narrative notes that gaining favor with these influential nobles is a crucial step to avoid the family's downfall. An orange-haired woman with a fake smile asks Michael if he has measured Elizabeth's magical power levels yet. The woman maliciously mentions Adelina's pitiful illness, while Elizabeth looks back with a look of pure, unadulterated confusion. Elizabeth senses the woman's hostile intent, her expression turning dark as a jagged, menacing energy fills the background. Michael's eyes glow with a lethal intensity as the orange-haired woman continues her backhanded compliments about Elizabeth's appearance. The scene flashes back to the study, showing the blue-haired Adelina working diligently and looking perfectly healthy. Elizabeth remembers warning Adelina about a document error, yelling "Ta-e" as she slapped the paper with her hand. A close-up of Adelina reveals her sharp gold eyes narrowing as she discovers a suspicious note regarding an offering. Back at the party, Michael unleashes a terrifying aura of purple mana, causing the rude guest to scream in terror. The orange-haired woman trembles as she maliciously wonders aloud who Elizabeth inherited her supposedly charming features from. Elizabeth realizes her purple hair doesn't resemble anyone else in her family, sparking a moment of quiet internal doubt. Michael leans in with a terrifyingly calm expression, asking the woman to repeat her statement, while Elizabeth watches nervously. The purple-haired baby ponders the woman's comments about her nose and forehead, noticing the identical features they share. Michael stands tall, his imposing shadow looming over the table as he declares he will hear no more objections. A decorative fan is snapped open with a sharp, echoing crack, cutting through the heavy and oppressive social atmosphere. The blonde first queen lowers her fan, revealing a cold and calculating gaze directed toward the bickering noblewomen. Elizabeth throws a comically small tantrum, shouting her refusal to cooperate with the rude woman's subtle insults. The queen smiles behind her fan, her eyes flashing with a predatory light as she mentions her specific wishes. The orange-haired noblewoman sits in a dark, oppressive silence, paralyzed by the weight of the queen's intense gaze. A wide view shows the grand table where the queen and her guests are seated in a tense, formal circle. Elizabeth reflects on how seating proximity to the host at these parties indicates a noble's true level of importance. Silence falls over the garden as the guests settle into their seats, the social hierarchy having been wordlessly established. The first queen snaps her fan shut and commands the servants to change the tea leaves, regaining control. A servant presents a tray of cups containing a vibrant purple tea, specially gifted by a neighboring country's ambassador. Two guests praise the tea's beautiful aroma and color, desperately trying to restore a sense of forced politeness. The orange-haired woman gushes over the queen's diplomatic successes, while Michael drinks his tea in a silent, stoic manner. Elizabeth glares at a cupcake on her plate, her expression grumpy and determined as she prepares for a prank. The baby's hand tosses the cupcake, while a thought bubble identifies the tea as her father's special import. The cupcake flies through the air, smacking the rude orange-haired woman directly in the mouth with a loud splat. Guests whisper in shock, while the woman, covered in frosting, blushes with deep humiliation and begs for forgiveness. Michael calmly explains that Elizabeth only wanted the guest to enjoy the queen's sweets as the baby cheers happily. A close-up of the first queen shows her sharp blue eye narrowing as she dismisses the event as childish. The disgraced orange-haired woman hastily excuses herself from the table, fleeing the garden party in absolute social defeat. Elizabeth laughs with a noblewoman, while Michael watches his daughter's successful social maneuvering with a faint, satisfied smile. The first queen remarks on Elizabeth's energy, contrasting it with her own princess, who is far more reserved. Silhouetted figures in a decorative frame represent the first queen's daughter, who is currently studying in a distant land. More shadows reveal the second queen's two princes, who remain hidden from the public to avoid political friction. Michael sits tall with Elizabeth, facing the blonde first queen as a heavy, expectant silence hangs over the table. The crowd gasps in collective shock as Michael reveals that Elizabeth was once suffering under a malicious curse. Looking deeply skeptical, the first queen questions why Michael chose to make such a dramatic announcement here and now. Michael coolly explains that Elizabeth overcame the curse, which originated from a noble with access to the palace. Elizabeth looks upward, mentally questioning if involving the entire nobility in this dangerous revelation is truly a wise move. A tense silence descends upon the garden as the first queen hides her inscrutable expression behind her decorative fan. Michael warns the guests that the king intends to take immediate action, causing further unease among the gathered nobility. Realizing her father's strategy, Elizabeth sees he is weaponizing public pressure to force the king into a decisive move. As Michael conducts business, a brown-haired servant carefully bottle feeds the resting Elizabeth, a soft gulping sound filling the air. From the shadows, an orange-haired woman watches Elizabeth with a dark, resentful gaze, harboring a dangerous and silent grudge. The social event continues as a maid balances a tea tray, moving through the garden under many watchful eyes. The orange-haired woman laughs heartily as the maid suddenly stumbles, causing her tea tray to wobble and tip dangerously. Chaos erupts with a startled "ah!" as a teapot falls, splashing vibrant purple tea directly toward the helpless baby. A protective hand moves with a sudden whish, shielding Elizabeth as the servant pulls her close in absolute terror. Adelina appears in a radiant yellow dress, having arrived just in time to physically block the splashing purple liquid. With her golden eyes burning with fury, Adelina demands to know what the culprit intended to do to her child.